Alright, welcome back, Generals, to another Let's Fix Generals 0 Hour to make the best game ever. Well, this is not a Let's Fix. I thought that we can watch the Mark Lorenzen interview. Mark Lorenzen by Dominator. Yeah, original Generals 0 Hour developer, programmer. I think we have seen already a lot of comments from him in the code. Let's take a quick look here at Lorenzen. Yeah, let's see. Oh yeah, there, to-do Lorenzens. He still has a job to do here. Yeah, let's see, point group, what is this? Point GR. Yeah, point group class, yeah. Yeah, so here some to-do's here. Use a fast while loop. Declare the locals outside this loop. Use pointer arithmetic throughout this block. I'm not sure if like use a fast while loop. I mean, the compiler will make it fast. Like, I don't know. Maybe back in the day, the compiler didn't do such a good job. But typically, like if you make like putting the locals outside the loop, it won't change anything. That the compiler will optimize it in ways that it's optimal. So I don't think that things like this, things like that, will make any difference. But okay, yeah. Let's see. So yeah, he has a lot of comments here, a lot of comments throughout the code in game logic, game clients, W3D device. So all things game engine he touched in 2002. Yeah. Mop, angry mop here he touched. Yeah. Why is that? What is going on here? What is this comment block? 7 times Lorenzen add a mob member interface. So I guess that makes it more visible, adding a comment like this. Okay, I see. Put on ice until later, and Lorenzen. Okay, good. Yeah, so he has made his mark in the file, in the source code. Okay, so I enabled here the subtitles. They are auto-generated though, so I don't know how useful they are. I don't know. Should I have them enabled or disable them? No, let's disable them so you can choose yourself if you want. Because I guess, I don't know what will happen if YouTube will auto-generate the same subtitles for the video that I now create. It's possible. It's possible. Yeah. Okay, I want to put subtitles, yeah. Okay, so let's make this full screen and let's go. Let me double check the audio though. Check. Let me see here.
Yo guys, what is up? Welcome back to some more 0 Hour. Today I have a super exciting interview for you. It is with a guy named Mark Lorenzen, who was one of the main engineers who worked on Generals and 0 Hour alongside various other people, and that includes Chris Mornis, who you may remember that we interviewed just a few months ago. Now, this meeting was recorded on Zoom, so my camera definitely has better quality than last time. You'll remember last time it messed up, but Zoom captured this in a different format, which is one face at a time rather than both at the same time. So next time, of course, I'll try to capture both at the same time. But anyway, you're going to hear loads of stuff that's super interesting here from Mark, so let's get into it. Okay. Yeah, I think that started.
Wow, he has a face. Okay.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, welcome, Mark. Thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Like I just said, I play 0 Hour pretty much every day and have done for many years. And so even though I spoke to Chris, as you probably saw a few months ago, to be speaking to another developer now, it's actually it's kind of crazy. And yeah, the viewers and anyone watching this will really love it. So massively appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Richard.
So yeah, you were one of the primary developers. You said you worked alongside Chris Mornis, who we interviewed a few months ago.
Nice.
And you pretty much had the same role as him. Is that right?
Yeah, he and I had similar roles, and we kind of divided the responsibility of adding all of the 0 hour features to the general's code base.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
And yeah, just any background info you want to share about yourself. Like people might be interested, like where you're from. Guess you're from the US, but if you want to tell people,
Mhm. Yeah, I grew up in California, and but I've been in Utah for the last 20 years.
okay,
I'm a veteran of the games industry. I started in '91, working for Sega. Um, I don't know. Do you want to like know my
yeah,
game?
It's an epic start. So I find it funny because now we go back way in time, 1991. Okay, I'm sorry for interrupting. Let's hear this. This is it's gonna be interesting.
what
Pedigree? Yeah.
whatever you want to share. Yeah, that's great. I did quickly Google your name and typed games after it, and it came up with a list. I think there was like I don't know, 15-ish games. I did see you worked at Sega for on a few games. Yeah.
Yeah. So the yeah, I've worked on last time I counted it was like 32 or 33 different titles. But
Wow.
so started at Sega where I was started as a background artist slash level designer, and then switched to coding in an interim position. But the so I worked on Vector Man as a designer. I worked on various sports games, Ren and Stimpy, um, various. So then I left Sega to join Shiny, and where I worked on Earthworm Jim.
Yeah.
Um, And then some friends and I formed a company called The Neverhood, where we worked on a game called The Neverhood Chronicles, and another one for the Sony PlayStation called Skull Monkeys, which was a 2D platformer. Um, then eventually I got the job working at Electronic Arts, which at the time was kind of transitioning from being Westwood Studios and was kind of going under the name, um, what were they calling themselves? Anyhow, they were in an Irvine office for a while, and that's when I started. And then they moved to Los Angeles like within a year of after that. And
Okay.
that was a combination of people who were formerly of Westwood Studios, and then people who were part of the various Los Angeles-based EA studios that kind of all converged
Okay.
around 2000 or so, something like that.
He mentioned Earthworm Jim. I remember. I think I played that. It was a PC game, if I'm not mistaken. PC, yeah, or was it? I think it was on Windows. Yeah, Earthworm Jim. I certainly played that. It's like a 2D game with an earthworm. Yeah. Uh, yeah. The other games he mentioned Monkey Island or something about Monkey. I think there's a popular title, but I never played that, so I don't know.
So I saw the name like Westwood Pacific. Is that what it changed
Yeah.
from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Westwood Pacific was a name that it had for, I don't know, some number of months or maybe a year, because it was going from being purely Westwood to EA Pacific. So it was Westwood Pacific, then EA Pacific, and then EA. What was the studio was in Bel Air for a while, and then they moved to a new building that had been customized that was and then called it EALA, and it's been called EALA since then.
Okay.
Yeah. After working at EALA, I worked for another EA studio in Salt Lake, where I worked on The Sims and Tiger Woods Golf and various games for Hasbro. I worked at BioWare. I worked at Free Range Games, and a lot of other jobs in between that are games adjacent.
Okay.
like
I,
edutainment and design tools and things like that.
wow. Okay, yeah. So even more than I thought. I thought I saw like 15 titles, but you're saying way more. And are you still working on games and programming now, or
Yeah, like my latest project was at Free Range Games, a massive online skating game called Reckless, which is on Steam, or the early beta is still out on Steam. Um, where I was working on CCC, that's camera controls and character
okay?
for that. I worked at Telltale for a while, on the storybook style games. Anyhow, that's just
Yeah,
a hodgepodge of different things over the many years
yeah.
since CNC.
Okay, yeah. That's very interesting. Very interesting. Um, yeah. What specifically then did you do on Generals and Zero Hour? That's probably most of my fan base or viewers will be wanting to know. I know you listed a few things
Yeah.
on Discord. I won't steal your thunder.
All right, I jotted down a list just trying to jog my memory. So let me try to think. The very first thing that I did when I was the new guy
Yeah.
was the Gatling Cannon for the China faction. So that was the very first thing. Um, it was my first week on the job, and I did all the setup and all the connecting, the animation, the graphics, the sounds, the UI, everything. And then through a hideous blunder, I deleted all my work because I wasn't familiar with the source control
Oh wow.
system. So that was embarrassing for the new guy. And then I had to redo it all. There's an anecdote for you.
What was
All
that
right.
like a month's amount of work, or are we talking
No,
weeks or?
that was 1 week. That was the first
Okay.
5 days on the job.
Okay.
Okay, but 5 days is not terrible, but yeah, it's pretty bad. But to be fair, the Gatling Cannon is probably one of the least buggy things in the game. Yeah, it doesn't have any big issues, right? No range bug. It rotates, it targets, it shoots, it dies. There are some bugs regarding the model on, I think, winter snow or summer snow map or so. There's some bugs with damage states. There's also the I think the rotation does not really match the muzzle flashes. So some small issues, but just visuals. I think functionality wise, it's pretty good. So good job, Mark. Very good.
Yeah. And I had Chris Mornis was coaching me during that week. Um, yeah. Chris was the new guy until I showed up, and so I like deposed him as the new guy. And so it kind of fell to him to show me the ropes on everything.
Okay.
Um, so what did I make on Generals and Zero Hour? I did the building capture system, I did the spy satellite, did the radar van, did the angry mob, I re-engineered the particle system, um, including adding the ability to draw streaks, which is used for trails and exhaust for jets and missiles. I did the terrain distortion feature in the world builder. I added the stealth feature, which includes all the stealth ground units and the stealth fighter. Did the ambulance. I did all the laser effects and quite a bit of the laser weapon type innovation for the laser-based weapons. I did the microwave tank. I did the combat drop, which is where you can load rangers into the Chinook and drop them into a garrison. I did the railroad. That was actually in the original Generals.
Mhm.
Um, I did animated destructibles, which is not really a unit, but it's just a feature that a lot of other things used. So it's the ability for an animated object to still emit particles from its moving parts. That was something that the engine didn't have until I added it. I did the Spectre gunship. I did the EMP pulse um, weapon. I did the ion cannon, um, which Chris Mornis started that, and then he like got pulled onto, I think, the either the motorcycles or the terrorist or something, and so he handed that off to me to finish. Um, so I did the Gatling cannon and all the Gatling weapons. I did the Emperor tank and the Overlord tank and all of its various upgrades. I did the nationalism and propaganda powers. I added a feature which is used on lots of units, which was the nested containers, and that might need some explanation. But and I did the Helix helicopter. That's everything I could think of before the meeting started. I'll explain what nested containers are. If you upgrade an Emperor tank with the bunker, which sits on top of the turret, and then you load that full of infantry, and then you drive the Emperor tank into a Helix helicopter and then fly it. So that's a container inside a container inside a container. But while all that's happening, all of their various AIs are operational. And so every little infantry unit that's in that bunker, that's in that tank, that's in that helicopter is scanning for targets and testing range and determining whether their reload time is ready. And all the damage that's incurred to the helicopter then has to be inherited by the tank that's inside it, which is then inherited by the bunker, which is then inherited by the infantry. And
Wow.
so that was kind of a mess, but the designers who had conceived all of those special China upgrades wanted it that way, and then little by little, it was, it was thought like, what if we could put the Emperor tank in the helicopter? And so that was like a last minute thing, and so now we have infantry AI that's operating inside of a structure, that's operating inside of a moving vehicle, that's operating inside of an aircraft. So that was it was extremely convoluted.
That's also Humvees inside the combat Chinook, right? It's the same thing that they can shoot out of it. Yeah, it makes sense that this functionality would be there. Yeah.
Yeah, and now you put it like that. Probably we as players, we just take it for granted these things kind of work, but now you put it like that. That sounds extremely complex.
Well, it's just something that the code base didn't anticipate until finally it did, and so like that had to touch like probably 30 or 40 different areas of code in order for that to work properly.
Okay. Um, I've got a few things to say now. Now you've mentioned all them units, it's got me excited.
Mhm.
There's so you worked also on the upgrades for the Overlord. So let's say you put a Gatling cannon on top of the Overlord, the Emperor Overlord as well. That's you as well.
Yeah, yeah, or the propaganda tower. I think
Yeah.
there was the three. There was the bunker, the Gatling, and the propaganda tower.
And since you also did the Gatling cannon in the first place, that was basically your work then going on top of the tank that you made the
Yes.
slot for.
Yeah, and there's some redundancy in the implementation and some shared code across it, so that the Gatling, and with all the some of the tunings that can be had by the Gatling cannon are inherited, therefore, to the Gatling upgrade as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the Gatling cannon is a really cool building. I don't think it has any bugs or anything. I think it works perfectly. That there is one weird bug that it's extremely rare. I've seen it once in like 20 years of playing the game, which is that there was an Emperor tank that got sniped by the Jarman Kell, so it had no pilot or driver inside of it. So it became like civilian.
Okay.
And then a GLA worker ran to steal it. So normally it would then go to the enemy faction. It would go to the GLA faction, but
Right.
the worker actually became where the Gatling cannon should have been. So and it was just stood there with its arms out. I can send you the video later, but it's extremely rare. But it's like one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Okay. So there, I don't know. I could theorize what's happening there if you want to hear all the techno
Yeah,
babble, but
go,
yeah,
if you know it, go ahead. Yeah, yeah,
well, I mean, so for the GLA worker to inhabit a vehicle requires that it enter its container as the driver. So, like under what what we'd consider maybe more orthodox conditions like the Humvee, the driver is one of the infantry that are contained, within and have the ability to fire from the moving vehicle. But the worker probably was marked with a type because there in the Sage engine there's a kind of classification where you can say what kind of a thing are you, and then it's like a list of things that you like boxes that you tick. And so it might have been that it was kind of late in the development cycle that driver was a kind of that was assigned to the GLA worker so that he could steal things, steal vehicles, and become a pilot. And it might be that there was an inadequate filter on the Emperor tank's container that allowed it to contain drivers.
Okay.
Um, but the container for the tank is very specifically puts the what's called the drawable, that's the visualization of the unit, on top of the rotating turret at the top. And so that's probably why you get the worker sitting on the turret, because the code just blindly said, well, he's the right kind to put in my main container, and therefore he must be drawn. And so he was, and I wonder, was he drawn animated or in his T pose? Because the,
Just in a T pose, yeah, fixed. It looked
yeah,
hilarious.
well, yeah. Well, so that's my internal forensic
Yeah.
analysis of it. And probably like Chris or Graham would probably be going like, yeah, that's plausible.
So some of the other things you said, like the streaks from jets and things like that, and particles. I think inside Zero Hour, there's like certain particle effects that some of the people in coding would say are like expensive on the system, and like you have a lot of it, and very quickly your FPS, even if you've got an amazing computer, your FPS can drop very, very quickly. There's certain particles in the world build away. If you like place like 10 of them, for example, your FPS will just go down for no apparent reason. Is there any like explanation you could give on that? Like, or do you think that's like fixable now we have the source code by the community, for example?
Well, I think that if modern shaders were replaced the shaders that Mark Wilczynski made, Mark Wilczynski was our rendering engineer, and he was dealing with the shader model of the time, which is, decades old now. And so for those shaders to be ported to modern video cards directly is not going to exploit any of the hardware. Whereas if a modern shader that's using modern shader libraries, I bet the rendering, things like the fill rate and the transform and things like that would be perhaps hundreds of times more efficient.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
one thing. Another is that there's three or four different classes of particles in the Sage engine, and one is just your usual quad camera facing, billboard particle. But then there's other ones called decals, which are rendered to the terrain. So, for example, if you were to poison or irradiate, using the toxin or the radiation powers, and you see that the effect is spreading across the terrain, that's done with a decal. So decals are extremely expensive because you have to generate new draw calls for the terrain data that which then have the projection of the decal texture on them. Um, and we use those very liberally in the game because they looked really cool. But it might be under those conditions that it's slowing down. And if any engineers who are working on optimization are listening, maybe just take that as a high level direction to re-engineer the decal feature, perhaps even from scratch inside the game engine device terrain draw
Okay.
code.
It would have been interesting if Dominator would have clarified which particle exactly he means, like a sample. So, for example, we know that Dragon Tank firewall can be very slow, right? But that's a very special case because the Dragon tank, it actually shoots missiles. So out of the fire nozzle, there comes little objects, and each of these objects then owns like a particle system with a certain lifetime, and these objects that come out, these fire objects, they travel, right? So these are like missiles, a lot of them, right? So yeah, it shoots all the time and it turns all the time, and there's a lot of missiles coming out. It's the same thing that happens with the I think it's the same thing that happens with the toxin streams from tunnels and toxin tractor. It's like missiles disguised as like some as if it's a stream, right? You just need a lot of small missiles that you don't really identify as missiles, but conceptually they are missiles. And so these things in mass, as far as I can tell, are quite heavy because they are treated as like individual objects, right? And they go through the object update and they own a lot of resources. So they're probably expensive to spawn, expensive to delete because then they touch a lot of memory. So I think there's potential to optimize these kinds of things by having a good look at, how expensive is it actually to maintain these objects, and can we make that cheaper, right? And then I think the particle cost also goes down in accordance. Decals, I don't know, like how expensive. If he says expensive, yeah, then I guess that's it. I don't know. I haven't looked at that. But yeah, overall, I don't know. I haven't really benchmarked particles, but yeah, by just reducing the amount of things that draw, the amount of instances per particle system, makes things a little bit cheaper, right? Not a whole lot, but yeah, just cut down on the amount of particles and the amount of things that the particle spawns, which is like a data optimization. It's not necessarily code, but yeah, I guess in code there's probably many things that can be optimized. But I'm not so familiar about what exactly. It would have to be profiled to see exactly. Okay, the cost is here. Like it's you cannot really speculate about like specifics without actually taking a performance capture and looking like, okay, what is actually taking so long to get this frame done, right? So yeah, but my guess is that there's a big cost with the objects, flame tank, toxin tractors. Yeah, like you can, for example, you take 30 toxin tractors and you shoot on some target with all of them at the same time. You will see that performance will go down. Same with toxin rebels as well. When you have like these toxin rebels and you shoot on the tunnel, right? Like what often happens is you have this 3-star toxin rebel ambush, right? And then you put them in front of a sneak attack to clear any pops from the sneak attack, and when they shoot on that sneak attack, it lowers the performance because this toxin stream is really expensive. Yeah.
Or have those people ask me. I can probably direct them to where that code is.
That's a very good point, actually, because people who are looking through the source code now and trying to create like a community-made update or patch, they probably will be watching this. In fact, they definitely will. So those little tips are really handy, actually.
Yeah, look for a W3D terrain draw.
Okay.
You'll see the reference to the decal draw operations.
Yeah.
There's also another thing that I added, which was the blur. It's a special particle that draws that uses its location on the destination graphics buffer as a texture, and then reorients the UV coordinates so that it distorts, and then it draws that transparently. And so that's used for the microwave tank. It's used for all of the different things that make heat effects, including some of the nuke effects. And that's expensive too, because we have to reset the draw context to use the display as a texture. So we have to take the display, copy it to a buffer, and then render the particles using that buffer as the texture. So it's another thing that probably could be easily optimized.
That is a really cool effect, actually, the microwave tank with the heat effect. It
Yeah.
looks really, really decent for 2003 as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
It was well, from my perspective, it was a new invention. I mean, that I'm not to say that other people didn't have the same idea, but um yeah, Mark Volchinski and I were collaborated on that, and I was pretty proud of it.
yeah. I actually now most of us have the heat effects turned off because we figured out if we go into the NVIDIA control panel from your desktop, you can set things like anti-aliasing to 16 times and various other settings, and it makes all of your edges inside the game much more crisp, and you don't have that diagonal like zigzag on the edges. It makes it way more
Hmm.
crisp. But the thing is, when you do all of that and you look at a microwave tank with the heat effect on, your screen goes black. I don't know why that happens, but we figured out it's easier to and better overall to turn off the heat effect and have these NVIDIA settings. So we've got all these everything looks real crisp.
It's funny that he mentions this. He basically tells Mark, "Hey man, the heat effect that you built that we were so proud of is a piece of shit." Let's see what he says about that.
I think that that's another thing that could be addressed with just having a modern graphics specialist looking at the
Yeah.
low level code in the W3D WW3D. That's the Westwood graphics library that was part of the Sage engine.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, in fact, maybe all of that needs to just be replaced with something modern. The fact that the old code will compile and run, and that the shader model is reverse, is backwards compatible on modern video cards, is a happy thing for getting the game to compile and run, but it isn't really suitable because it doesn't exploit the modern hardware.
Hmm.
Anyhow,
Okay.
that's where that is.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the dream for us will be that gets updated. We have the heat effects back, and we keep the crisp edges too. That's the dream. So yeah, we'll see where the guys get.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of some of the other things you just read out. So things like the nationalism upgrade, I think.
One more point here from my angle. I I mean, I haven't profiled the game, so I can't really say like what is expensive and what is not. I mean, the rendering is one component, but I think like there's a lot of expensive stuff actually in the game logic update. Right? The game state itself is just really expensive. So I don't know, like if rendering costs really dwarf everything. Probably not. I assume it's just like the game state on its own is really expensive to begin with, not the rendering. I'm not sold that the rendering, because when you take, for example, a replay, yeah, and you enable fast forwarding, and there's a lot of action going on, and you fast forward the replay, then you see like how slow it actually becomes by just doing the replay update, which is without any rendering, right? So the fast forward, it skips the render frames and it just progresses the game logic, right? And that on its own is really, really slow to begin with. So I think the biggest gains will actually come from making the core game logic more efficient. And that would probably be a huge undertaking. As for rendering, probably as well, but maybe it is not as expensive as one would believe it is. I mean, because there's not so much going on, right? The terrain is simple, the objects are simple, the textures are kind of small, the particle effects are sort of cheap, right? So there's not much going on. Like, it's not as demanding as modern games, which have like 10x the requirements on the graphics, right? So there's not much going on, but the logic itself, like, how all the objects interact when they shoot and receive damage, and they do this and move there, right? So all these updates, they are very expensive. So I expect that the most work will go in this direction. Yeah. I'm not a rendering engineer, so I can't really comment on this, but yeah, there's probably also gains and improvements for sure.
I think you mentioned Are they upgrades like that, like a more simple thing to implement than like a Gatling cannon, for example?
Well, yeah, it's completely different. It is that was rather simple because we have a precedent for area buffs. Um, an area buff is just where you have an object that pings the what's called the partition manager. I'm trying to think in the old code base. So
Mhm.
so you so it pings a let's say a circular region of the playfield, finds all the units, and then bequeaths a temporary buff on them, and that's how it's implemented. And so the propaganda tower will like ping like once every 2 seconds or something like that. And so everything that it finds within range, it just adds this little update, which causes you to have this buff added to your armor and to your weapon. It affects your reload. It affects the hits in your weapon. It affects your it might even affect your locomotor. Um, but then for it's something that's also attached like to heroes. So like when you have Jarman Kell or Black Lotus or Colonel Burton, um, that all of the units that are within range of them are kind of said to be aware of being near him, and so they are filled with this nationalism, and so they get that buff too. And the same nationalism upgrade is affects all three factions in one way or another. They're just called different things in the in the story layer, but it's the same implementation.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so that's what that is.
Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah, I'm just trying to think of some of the other things you quickly said, like the particle cannon. Then, so you said Chris started it. I think you finished it. Is that like the firing mechanism and the blue or pink laser that goes up?
Yeah, and then you steer it around so you burn what you want to burn you drive
Yeah.
it around through the camp. That and so that as with many of the other special powers, had kind of a long cook time between engineering and the design team because they'll conceive of the power and then we'll implement it the way that they spec'd it. And then the whole team plays the game and comes up with ideas to make it better or changes our mind about whether it's as cool as we thought it would be or and some things just morph quite a bit. And I think the ion cannon was one that it kept getting touched and touched again and touched again. Um, just because it's effectively a local area nuke that you can drive around in the in the enemy's base,
Okay.
um, just with different effects attached to it. Um, and ultimately, it got tuned so that you could, depending on which structure you're trying to burn down with it, I think, we ended up being like you could burn down two major and one minor structure before it expires if you drive it um, with optimal, efficiency. Um, and so that was a skill feature, that was desired that you, instead of just like dropping a giant reticle and then fire and forget, it's one that you had to babysit, right?
Yeah.
So you'd fire it and then it would go, and the beam would come down, and then you had to go burn this, no, burn that, burn that. Kind of like a drone pilot would have to be,
Mhm.
um, you know, actually paying attention to what they're doing.
Mhm. So like on the particle cannon, I think Chris said you would get like a mini brief, like I don't know, like a Pokemon card or whatever, a brief card, and it would say what the game designer would want on there. So for the particle cannon, or the ion cannon, as you call it, would it have said on there, we want it to destroy 2 buildings and a half, and or did you come up with that as you were doing it?
The 2.5 buildings thing would have been something that, well, in this case, I think it was either Jason Bender or Greg Black, which were some of our senior designers. I don't remember which. Sorry, guys. It was one of the two of you. And what was something that we settled on as being the right balance for the power. Um, Because I mean, one of the most important things to know about making an RTS and about making an RTS in the Sage engine is how much time and attention it takes to balance the units and balance the factions. Um, and that's a process of implementing the unit or the structure or the power, getting it into the product, and then getting the whole team to play it every day again and again and again. And for the designers, especially the ones whose responsibility it is for tuning, are monitoring how people feel about it, what the outcomes are, statistically, and then tweaking. It's something as simple as tweaking a hit point is often how you balance the units, but sometimes it requires actually popping the hood and changing the implementation. And for the ion cannon, that kept having to touch the code because we need to change its behavior to make it feel right and to feel fair. The China has little and big nukes and unit-driven nukes and superpower nukes, and the GLA had the Scud Storm and the toxin powers and things like that. And then the US had, well, they had the EMP and the ion cannon were its analogs to those, but they're asymmetrical. They don't behave exactly like each other. So it's not just a matter of saying like all three factions get this thing and it's just reskinned to look like that one's Chinese and this one is US. These were the analogs to each other's within the faction, but they are not like each other. And so all of those took a lot of massaging and tweaking for the balance to feel right.
Okay. So were you also involved in that, in playing games? And if you noticed, I don't know, that the China tank was too weak, for example, you would give that feedback, or the designers would be watching you anyway. So your feedback towards the balance would be taken on board too.
My feedback is worth as much as anyone else's, but we had a team, like an on-site team that would play the game every day, in skirmishes and in tournaments. Um, and I don't know, real hardcore players like Chris would have a whole lot more input than I would because I'm not a hardcore player like him. Um, in fact, there's an anecdote story that I'd like to share about
Yeah, please do.
that later. So the designers would be involved, hands-on involved in playing it too, and everyone and paying attention to just the gradual trend of the shifting balance between the factions and their powers and their units, and looking for exploits, making sure to mitigate those exploits so that it doesn't feel unfair.
I totally understand his position. So he was more of the type that would focus on implementing, right, and making things work functionality wise, but he wouldn't play a part in driving game design and making sure that everything plays picture perfect and all the damages and all the armors are all properly set up for a fair environment, because that's not really that's not the responsibility of a programmer generally, unless he does programming and designing and tweaking things, but yeah, his responsibility was implementing things. And yeah, I can totally understand this. And it's also like how I feel in my job. I'm more like just implement things, but too noob to give really comments on how the product will then be experienced by the user, right? It's a different expertise, and it requires like in-depth knowledge and really like engaging a lot, sinking a lot of time into the product, right? So yeah, and that time that you put into playing the product, you can't put into developing the product, although they are similar things. But I would say a programmer has responsibilities that they serve great purposes that go besides just like making the gameplay all nice. Like, for example, serving the purpose of providing a stable game experience where you don't experience crashes or slowdowns, performance issues, right? That is a big topic on its own, and that requires a lot of attention. So attention needs to be split, right? And you can't pay attention to everything. So if a programmer says, yeah, I can't really say anything about this balancing or this gameplay, this decision, right? Then yeah, totally understandable. Yeah.
Some of those tuning defects and exploits make it into the product. And one of the things about Generals in 0 Hour is that I was part of the hit squad where after we had shipped it, we were responding to the playing community, because then the number of players who are experiencing that balance factor, multiplies by many thousands, and we get that feedback. And so making those tweaks, in hand with the design and feedback to mitigate that. And there were quite a few of those that got put into the product after, so, and that in order to inherit the fixes, of course, the user had to download a patch. And so it's not like today where the product is just considered live and it updates itself. The player had to deliberately go in and install the patch.
On the China tank, the Emperor Overlord's like the biggest tank. There's a bug in the game where the speaker tower comes naturally on it. It has it on it as default. But then when you upgrade the subliminal messaging, which makes the speaker tower 25% bigger, it doesn't work on the tank. Apparently there's a spelling mistake in the code. But there was always a theory, was that actually a typo, or did someone mistype it on purpose to quickly get it out of the game for balance? I don't know if that's even realistic.
I'm not aware of what that issue is, but I doubt that a spelling mistake can exist because everything was enumerations. I don't know, it might have been if it was something that was data driven, we have these INI files, INI files, which is like back in that era's equivalent to, say, XML or JSON, formatted data. And that's a lot can be done by just tweaking those files. But that is the only place where a spelling mistake might apply, where like you list the kind ofs, and if you misspelled it there, then the any parser would discard that token. Okay. And maybe it was an important token. So if that's the case, that's not misspelled in code. That would be misspelled in data.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it sounds to me that Dominator doesn't know the specifics about this issue. This concerns data, like Mark says, any file misspelled in data. I think from my perspective, it's clear that it's a bug. Like there are thousands of other bugs in the INI files. Yeah, I mean, it happens when you copy paste definitions and then you tweak something, then you change it there, and you're under time pressure. You will make mistakes, right? Especially if you don't have like strong tools that help you avoid mistakes, like a good version control, and well, they had that, but yeah, like tools that make it easy or autocorrect or show your errors, and nice text editors that go beyond Windows Notepad. So yeah, it probably was much easier to make any mistakes back in the day than it is today with all the tooling that helps developers provide with nice text editors that give you nice features, functionalities that help you craft good functional scripts and programs.
Yeah, I don't know where exactly it was. I'm sure someone will probably comment on this video and tell us. Any of the other things you worked on that maybe interesting when you worked on them? I suppose like the radar van, you said, quite a straightforward unit.
Yeah. Well, the unit itself is straightforward, but the ability to to have a static region of erased shroud it was the feature, and that was an
Yeah.
in-depth implementation.
Okay.
And it's the same with the spy satellite power for the U.S. faction. It does exactly the same thing. So it drops an unseen object there that deshrouds at a radius for as long as it is intended to exist there and survive. The case with the spy satellite is that you would drop it in and then it would just stay in the level for as long as you had power to run it, enough power plants to run it. Whereas the radar van was local to the van. So you could move your little peekaboo circle around wherever you drove it. Um, and that required uh, reallocating the shroud state of every grid square in the shroud every time the van moved. And so that's actually a little bit of an expensive thing to do. But so if you were GLA and you built a fleet of radar vans, you would slow the game down from the logic layer doing that.
Okay.
There would be ways to optimize that now that I think about it, but that was every van would be repainting the entire shroud every time it moved.
I'm a bit confused about what he says here because every unit reveals a shroud in a certain radius. That's not unique to the radar van. The ability of the radar van is, like you said, it's like the spy satellite that you can drop this object somewhere on the map, and then it would reveal, like any other unit, the area around that object anywhere on the map, right? So I'm not sure what he refers to there, that the radar van itself is expensive. I don't see it. I don't see it. It should act like any other unit. If it's not, then that's probably doing something unnecessary, right? So whether you move a technical over the map or the radar van, both reveal the shroud as they move along, right? So it's the same. It's only the ability, as he said, that it drops this object and reveals additional parts, but these are only temporary, right? So the object will time out and then it will destruct and then it will be not revealed again, right? So, and it's on a recharge, so every radar van has this ability and then it needs to wait. So if you build 10 of these, you can reveal 10 things at the same time. But I mean, that's just 10 objects there. It doesn't sound to me that this is a big problem, but maybe I'm missing something here. Yeah.
Wow. There's me thinking it's just a simple little radar van, and this is the interesting stuff. We find out it's actually far more complex than we think.
Well, yeah, I mean the fog of war slash shroud feature. I mean, you know the game really well. You know that you get that the world is blacked out until it's visited, and then it becomes shrouded, and then the shroud can be revealed, and so then there's a revealed state, and then revealed will revert to shrouded
Yeah.
if you vacate. And so it's that toggling of every grid square between revealed and shrouded that we're talking about.
Let him continue.
The Helix helicopter is fun to implement. It's actually it's one of the quirks of balance in the game because it's extremely capable. You can put an Overlord tank in it and fly that tank around. And the infantry that are in the bunker that are on the tank can fire from the flying helicopter. And it's got a lot of capabilities, but it's so brittle that I think just with like one bazooka shot to it, and the thing is careening to the ground. Um, and I kind of remember that it was Greg Black, he's one of our senior designers, that he was responsible for the tuning of that unit. And he said he wanted that extreme disparity of having this ultra heavy lift, high capacity, bristling with armaments unit that can be taken out by a single infantry. And so it's so brittle and so vulnerable. And that one always felt weird to me because of that extremeness.
Okay.
It's interesting that he transitioned from Shroud to Helix complexity in the same sentence. What I wanted to note is that Dominator mentioned that for him, he just expected that the radar van is just a radar van and it's simple and it just works. But I think this is something that players don't recognize and don't understand in general, that the underlying logical complexity is probably much greater than what they imagine it is, because they probably they only see like the functionality from the high level, right? Okay, this unit can move, this unit can scan, this unit can be built, it can die, it's not that big of a deal, right? But they don't, and that's okay, right? But players don't really think about, okay, what actually happens fundamentally underneath, like how is it actually implemented. And the way to implement these things is not trivial and straightforward. You don't just say, make me a radar van and then the job is done. But it interacts with all these different systems, um, and has different abilities that need to be implemented, catered specifically to the requirements of that particular unit. And yeah, it can be very complex. Even the smallest, limited functionalities that you think of as a user of can be really complex in code. Yeah, and it's easy to make mistakes there, right? So the implementation can be buggy. It can be fatal, as in like it could crash the game client. It could mismatch the game client. Yeah, it could turn the world to black when you look at it, right? So a lot of things can go wrong because of the complexity. Yeah, it's not something that players are aware of, and the result of not being aware of this is that players will naturally ask for features or for timelines that are unsustainable, right? They will make this request, or they put a one sentence request, and I think it's the easy thing to do, but it's maybe not as simple. Like for example, someone asks, "Hey, can you please release a client that has no lags?" Right? Ask that question. It's an innocent question, right? But it's a huge, complex issue. It's an issue that touches all the systems, right? It's a huge investigation. It's a huge polishing effort of all sorts of code, which can introduce all sorts of issues once you touch those codes. So, it's investigation, fixing, polishing, testing, all this. It's a Hercules task. But yeah, to the user, it's a simple thing because he just thinks, yeah, lag, bad, just fix it. How difficult can it be? Yeah, but I would say most of the times it's easier said than done, because it's not just one thing, it's many, many things that come together, right? But sometimes it's also the other way around, that maybe we expect that the problem is more complicated than it actually is, and it's just a small thing that just ruins everything. That happens, but I would say typically it's just a mass of complicated problems that just never end, and especially in General Zero Hour, which appears to have there is no limit in bugs. This game, I don't see us anywhere near fixing this game in some years. It probably will take a decade to polish this properly. But of course, there can be like milestones where you say, okay, now we are happy enough. This is good for a release, big upgrades, and then go from there. And then hopefully over time, your issues become smaller and smaller and smaller until you really just fix the really small things that not many care about, right? But right now, we are still in the process of fixing like really big things, like crashes, mismatches, right? These things are showstoppers, right? They prevent you from playing the game, and there are so many, and the problems can be very complex and takes a lot of time to fix all these things. Yeah.
Let me tell you the story. Okay, I told you that the whole team would gather in the auditorium and play our tournaments, head-to-head tournaments on the giant screen that we had in our big auditorium there at EALA. And we would set up the tournament elimination tree, so which was I think was randomly chosen, and I found that like in one of the play tiers that I was set against Chris, which is really bad because Chris is well, he he is the most mentally energetic, sharp, quick thinking, competitive, and nasty person on the team. And I worked side by side with him, and we were close friends, but like his personality and mine were quite opposites. And so I, in contrast, am the most sluggish, um, like non-twitch gameplay. If the game is being played at a slow pace, I enjoy it. But if I'm going head to head with somebody who's trying to slaughter me, that's just going to lead to nothing but embarrassment. And so I decided that since he was going to slaughter me in front of the whole company on the big screen, in some spectacular fashion, that I would in turn that I would lose the game spectacularly. So while he was building up all of his war factories and his powers and building and upgrading all of his units, to perfection, I was just building supply trucks. Supply truck, supply truck, supply truck, supply truck. And I did what was known for a long time as the supply truck rush, which is where I just rushed his base with 300 supply trucks. Which, as everyone knows, has no armaments and is so. But I did clog up his base, which frustrated him because he couldn't maneuver, and he was surrounded. But so it took him like 3 minutes of firing to finally murder me. But I was just laughing and laughing the whole time. So I got the moral victory by robbing him of his actual victory.
The supply truck rush.
Yeah.
I'll have to remember that one.
Yeah. If you know you're going to be slaughtered, just go out in a blaze of glory.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's cool.
Oh, the Spectre gunship was completely implemented from scratch. There was nothing in the product that supported anything about that at all. And so that was a fun one to implement because it borrowed almost nothing. You'd think that it would borrow like from other aircraft or from the delivery plane or from something like that, but only in concept, because the implementation was completely unique. It's a power that generates a unit that has an autonomous behavior, right? And kind of like the ion cannon, you can kind of babysit what its behavior is going to do. Most people don't. And I find, like, when I watch YouTube videos of people playing 0 Hour, they'll just drop the Spectre and then fire and forget. And I'm going like, no, I worked a whole week on making you pick targets. And because that's the essential thing about a Spectre gunship, is the ability to pew pew specific things.
Sure.
But if you don't, it'll just pick its own target, which that's all it does. Anyhow, so that was a lot of coding attention to something that ended up not being like a star in the game.
Oh, I don't think he needs to be disappointed. I think many players use the Spectre gunship as he intended, with being able to target. Like, so, for example, it happens often when you send it on 2 oil derricks, that you shoot on one oil derrick, and then once that is destroyed, then you re-aim on the other oil derrick, right? Or if there are 2 black markets, and you do the same. Or if there are hackers, you also target on multiple hackers. So I don't think that most players don't micromanage this. If they don't manage it, then only because they have something bigger to do that gives them more bang for the buck in the match. But generally, players are happy to micromanage the Spectre gunship. Yeah, so I think he can be proud of his implementation. Yeah, the week was not wasted.
And that was kind of disappointing too. It's also weird that a real Spectre gunship in real life is a AC 130 that's converted with all the cannons coming out the side of it. But in Zero Hour, it was this plane that doesn't exist, and I'm not sure why that was. I would have liked it better if it looked like the real one.
Yeah. I do think that's one of the reasons why Zero Hour is so popular is because you can resonate. Like a Humvee is one of the most common used vehicles in the US Army. F-22 Raptor, all of these things you can kind of. It's not the most realistic game in the world, but at least you can resonate with the realistic units and models. I think that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons.
I'm his tongue is out. I'm surprised that Dominator did not reaffirm Mark that the Spectre gunship is not a wasted implementation, but that the players actually use it because he should know. And I think I think it would be good if Dominator would give pushback on his disappointments, right? Because then it maybe also makes Mark feel better and gives better vibes in the interview, right? So I think that's a missed opportunity here by Dominator. He could have made Mark a very happy man, yeah. Because now maybe after the interview he realized, wow, I implemented useless things because I think they are useless, right? Because he doesn't know better, right? And maybe he had a bad sleep, right, because of it. And so I think Dominator could have made him a good service there. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially recently, as in the news you see there's these tunnel networks in Gaza, and we had tunnel networks 20 some years ago, and I wonder whether they got the idea from our game. But
Yeah, possibly.
I'm not aware that large scale tunnel network tactics were ever employed until the last couple of years, but it was in our game.
Well, Vietnam had a lot of tunnels. Viet Cong used tunnel systems extensively. Yeah. So there certainly was a reference to tunnels. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about like the invasion of Iraq. I don't know if they had tunnels. If we knew if the West knew about them in advance, I don't know.
Yeah, I remember that the Iraqi Air Force would bury their fighter jets in sand, which was I thought was like, well, what a mean thing to do to a fighter jet.
Wow.
But they did that to hide them.
Yeah. Did
Imagine
you
the,
hear?
the the cleaning job after that, though.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Did you hear what Chris said that there was conspiracy theories that Generals in Zero Hour was sponsored by the MOD, the Ministry of Defense?
Um, that's an interesting conspiracy. Well, some conspiracies are real, but I don't think that one is.
Yeah. But it's kind of predicted like the rise of China very well. Like I see YouTube videos all over the place saying China's the up and coming, wants to be the world superpower kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and the asymmetry of the strategic outlook of the West and of China
Yeah.
and of um, paramilitary groups, the all of those asymmetries are still found at play, in the actual strategic theaters of the world right now. So that's something to be proud of too, because you know so much of the our three factions, the GLA, the USA, the China, are asymmetrical but analogous, meaning that there's a foil to everything on another faction, and there's a way of foiling the other faction.
Mhm.
Um, and it's so beautifully balanced because we balanced that thing for months and months and months, specifically with generals with Zero Hour. Chris and I and the other engineers involved had to implement all of these features really quick because that too needed time to balance. And in that case, we were balancing the various generals, balancing the AI players as they chose the different generals, and balance the new units, the new powers, all of that. Uh, I'd say that I don't know how many months we spent balancing it, but it it could have enjoyed a lot more time than we spent on it because Zero Hour was something that kind of had to go out the door the same year. And in generals, there was 2+ years of implement the first half and then balance the game for the second half.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know how many replays or games or if you've watched any Zero Hour at all of late, but a lot of people would say that if you just make some Humvees from the US and you load it full of missile defenders, the rocket guys, they just roam around and just destroy everything. They can quickly destroy buildings. They can detect stealth with the stealth drone, the UAV drone. They can kill infantry. They're just like the wreckers of. I don't want to say they wreck the game, but they're severely overpowered. People would say.
Yeah, yeah, and there's other things like that. If you can build enough Emperor tanks or Overlord tanks, and this is going back to the original generals. Um, Overlord tanks have a disadvantage because they're slow and lumbering, and the firepower is concentrated on them instead of diffused. But if you can generate enough of them, they're unstoppable
Mhm.
against any ground force. And that's the kind of thing that another key aspect of the balance is the production rate and the upgrade rate so that you can get your upgrades and gain veterancy. And how fast can you gain the veterancy? That you know what veterancy is, but for those who might not know, that means that if your unit can experience battle and survive it, they come away stronger. And so the rate at which that is earned is another tunable thing. But if you get like fully upgraded and fully veteran and fully um, propagandized
Yeah.
overlord tanks, that's an unstoppable force too. And the only thing that'll take it out would be, ion cannons or something.
Yeah.
It's interesting that he says that because I wouldn't say that the Overlord tanks are overpowered. The Humvee, yes, very strong. Overlords, you see them dying all the time. I mean, yeah, they're strong when they have like the ECM tank in the mix, but the problem is they take a lot of space, right? And like the non-nuclear overlords are pretty slow turn. So they can be picked off with planes, with battle buses, with Humvees, right? So I think overlords are not overpowered, but it makes sense when he says it from the developer perspective. So like back in the day, the developers probably didn't have sophisticated rush tactics and exploited all the best capabilities of all the units. So from their perspective, probably was that yeah, Overlord is very strong. Let's keep it more on the low and don't make it too strong, right? But now in hindsight, I would say the Overlord is maybe not as strong. So for example, the China Overlord is not that often built, right? Yeah. The Emperor tank is built, but also the people prefer the Battle Master with the autoloader and Gatling tanks. The Nuke Overlord is pretty good because it's fast. Yeah. Yeah, but I wouldn't say it's an overpowered unit. I think the Overlord feels quite alright, except for the China Overlord. Maybe it's a bit too slow, I would say. But otherwise, like the damage output and the upgrades, I think that feels about right. It doesn't feel overpowered, right? It also gets wrecked by demo bikes, demo rebel aimbush, and Scud launchers, new cannons. There's a lot of things that can destroy the overlords. Yeah, rocket soldiers as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
But
think you're
like
right.
your Humvee example is one is you could consider that an exploit, an early exploit though, because you can just make a war factory and a barracks, and you can start creating those exploits and like pack the Humvees with missile men and off they go, right?
Mhm.
Um, and it's quick to train a missile man and quick to build a Humvee too. So like that's a very early exploit.
Yeah. I think even if let's say the Humvee wasn't able to build like the UAV drone, so it couldn't detect stealth as well. Like if you just take that one thing away, at least it would balance it a bit. Because if it can
Or push
detect,
it to later. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Push it that it's like it's only available on a veteran unit or something. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, or unlocked from a certain building or something, yeah.
Right.
So
It's interesting that Dominator didn't push back on the claim that the Overlord would be unstoppable in numbers. Yeah, that's interesting.
it, I mean, this goes without saying. If you had another 12 months of just balancing that game 0 hour, without a
Yes.
doubt, there was more changes you probably wanted to make. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there were changes that we made after it shipped. But eventually, everyone who could contribute to all that balancing effort was diverted to other, because for example, I was put onto Battle for Middle Earth One, while it felt like there were still things to do on Zero Hour. But you got to move on to the next project.
Okay. So from the list of things that you worked on, I understand you were a developer or a programmer. So generally, you're given a set card or whatever to make this work or make it happen. But was there anything that you yourself came up with and the EA took on board? Like Chris Mornis said, for example, that he came up with the idea of workers' shoes and subsequently that got implemented. Was there anything you had like that?
Um, the ability um, to nurse the targeting reticle for the Spectre and for the EMP. No, not the EMP, the Iron Cannon. That
Okay.
was my I don't want to claim that it was my original idea, but it wasn't in the first spec, and it was one that I championed. And one special power that a programmer has is that they can demonstrate their idea live. And so I implemented it and then got permission.
Okay.
Um, the There were a lot of those kinds of things on the Battle for Middle Earth games that followed, where it was my initiative. Uh, okay, one thing, and I think it might be present in Zero Hour, but if I'm mistaken, then is a Middle Earth feature, and that
Mm.
was the lasso. Um, you can use the mouse to marquee select the units in the field, and you can add and subtract using the modifier keys. But I added another key that allows you to do a random shape lasso, and almost nobody knows that it exists. That was one that I just wanted, and so I implemented it one afternoon and then told people about it much later.
That's actually a pretty cool idea. Yeah. No, he says it. No, no, no. Since you mentioned it, yeah, it makes a lot of sense because at 0 hour you can only do the rectangle selections or the add selections with a shift modifier, I think, right? Add to selection. But yeah, having a lasso does make sense. Yeah. Huh. It's an interesting idea.
I've seen
Um,
that in other games. I'm not aware of it in 0 hour, so maybe that was Battle for Middle Earth. Unless you're telling me there's a secret that I don't know about, then that would be very
Well,
interesting.
yeah, I'm sure it's not documented, but there's some combination of keys that like control shift while dragging, that will, instead of making the rectangular marquee, will make a random lasso.
Yeah.
And that's handy because you want like I want this whole crowd of units, but not you. And so you just draw,
Yeah.
exclude him from the shape. Whereas the other way of doing that is to like, okay, take everybody and then like minus you, minus you, minus you, minus you.
Takes a while. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a little bit less
Okay.
housekeeping and babysitting. Um, I improved the world builder features for the level design guys, which was kind of things that I kind of did on the fly without it being on my, I didn't have a ticket for it, but I would just improve the world builder for the level designer guys. Because their job was really, really hard. That tool is clunky and slow and cryptic, and so
Hmm.
a lot of what made that tool better was my initiative,
Okay.
uh, including the ability to sculpt terrain. Because when I got there, the terrain feature just had up and down, terrain up, terrain down. And so I added features that allow you to make slopes and plains and plateaus and ramps and things like that. Yeah, I don't know. There's probably more answers to you, but I just can't think good. I'm sorry.
Maybe that'll come up in the next few questions.
Maybe.
So, did you enjoy working in the EA? I think EALS team. Yeah, that's what Chris Morris said. It was one of like the best teams he'd worked for. Was that the same for you, or?
Yeah, that's a time when I felt like I was the most privileged to be working on that team in that project and the most connected to my audience. Um, because I was a fan of the game before I got on the team.
Okay.
So that's like an ideal thing for somebody in my industry. It's kind of a dream.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, if I look back to like all the projects I worked on, I would say that Generals in Zero Hour and the Middle Earth games were my favorite
Okay.
and where I was most vibing with. I learned the most while there. I did a lot of my best work there. I felt good about it. It was well received by the gaming public. Everything kind of just clicked.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really really cool. Really good to hear. And do you still keep in touch with anyone from that team? Obviously, I know you must speak to Chris because I think he's put me in touch with you. But
Actually, Chris complains that I don't connect with him enough.
oh, really?
Um, well, I mean, I talk to Chris, I talk to him on LinkedIn every time I lose my job and say, like, hey, do you know anyone who's hiring? He
Okay,
says,
fair
well,
enough.
says, um, there's, okay, one of the engineers on the team, Scott Bowen, I stayed kind of connected to him a bit for years afterward. There's some producers and designers on the team who I'm cordial and friendly with, just as, like sharing stuff that's happening in the industry. Um, like, yeah, I mean, it's sad. I moved away uh, it was 2005. I moved from California to Utah. And so with that, I just like lost a bunch of friends all at once. So,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. So yeah, you worked on Battle for Middle Earth 1 and 2. I mean,
mhm.
most of my viewers who are watching this will definitely be interested in Zero Hour, but there might be a few people that are also into that. Could you describe maybe briefly a couple of things or a few of the main things that you did on those games?
Sure. Um, well, Battle for Middle Earth 1 was rushed out, and a lot of the features that it was supposed to have, it didn't, which was really sad. Like you could only build your structures on prescribed build pads that the designer placed. And that was super sad because part of the core tactics of an RTS is deciding where you want your base and how you form it and that kind of a thing. And so on Battle for Middle Earth 2, they said, Mark, we need, custom base building and we want a castle system so where you can build walls and turrets and drawbridges and gates and portals. And and we want the walls to be protective and destructible, and we want some of the enemy units to be able to breach them and others not. And so I did that whole nest of features where you can stretch out walls, spans of walls that are connected between towers and upgrade the towers and walls and things. And I also made it so that some units like goblins and giant spiders and things like that can crawl up over the walls and attack you inside your base and that kind of thing. Another such thing was flying beasts. So the eagles and the fell beasts, which are the flying Nazgul. I introduced that as a feature completely from scratch. So it's the ability for the unit to fly, to hover, to swoop down and attack things, swoop down, pick ground units up from the ground, take them in airborne and drop them, and to engage with each other in hand-to-hand dogfights while flying, and to not fly through each other while they go around in the world. And I was kind of proud of that. I usually am awful at estimating the amount of time a feature is going to take, but on that one they said how long would it take from scratch to get from nothing to eagles and fell beasts? And I said 24 days, and
Wow.
it took 24 days. And I keep telling that story because it's the only time I ever rang that bell.
So, am I right in saying?
On that note, I totally agree with it. It's so hard to give accurate estimations. I found that I refuse to give estimations typically. Although you have like an idea of how long it takes, but then there's always something coming that it takes longer. I know it's just like you make promises and then you put yourself under pressure. So giving no estimation is generally better, but yeah, that makes the manager not very happy because he wants to know how long that thing takes, right, for project planning. Yeah. So you just say, okay, a number that sounds reasonable, and I think that's generally good enough, and managers are happy, right? But yeah, giving, as you said, timely estimations, always difficult.
Saying you would have learned loads of skills and loads of experience from building generals and 0 hour. So probably you put those skills to use and you were better at estimating when you came to Battle for Middle Earth.
Yes, yeah. And,
Yeah.
and by that time, I was one of the only remaining devs from the Generals in 0 hour team that was left. I mean, we had Chris for a while, although I think he was working on other projects too. And then, and Graham and John Alquist and pretty much everyone else on the team was a new guy.
Okay.
By the time we were working on well, what I call a new guy, somebody who wasn't there for generals is what I mean. But yeah, I mean it's all based on the same code base. We had a technical designer named John Combs who was an absolute superstar, and he had prototyped the Battle for Middle Earth game by himself by taking 0 hour and renaming everything. So like this is a cavalry and that is a battering ram, and so he's just taking tanks and jeeps and motorcycles and things from 0 hour, and as much as was possible, reskinning it or modding that into a early Lord of the Rings proof of concept. And that both sold the concept, both internally for EA and with our external partners. But it was something that the whole team was able to pick up and play and say like, hey, look, we're playing Lord of the Rings. It all looks like tanks and motorcycles, but it's Lord of the Rings. And then so the work was then to make it look like Lord of the Rings, which was a lot of work because that's very highly specific style. But then to implement things like actual cavalry and actual dragons and actual castles and things.
Mhm.
But that was a stroke of genius where he was able to mod 0 hour into a Lord of the Rings game initially.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Probably a lot of people don't realize that, but it's really really interesting.
Yeah, and yeah, those Lord of the Rings game and the CNC3 game in the various CNC games that followed the Lord of the Rings games, they're all built on top of that same code base, the Sage engine. We call it the Sage engine, but really it's it's generals, and then we add to that, and then it's 0 hour, and then we add to that, and then it's Lord of the Rings, and then we add to that, and then it's CNC3.
Okay.
Um, so everyone who works on the game is working on the engine, and so the engine just becomes more robust, more performant, more full featured because the new game requires that expansion to the engine, to where now the engine is, I mean, it's packed with features, including some that are very esoteric and specific to 0 hour or to Lord of the Rings, and some that are just universally extensible. And for modders, that has to be just really fertile ground because you can make whatever infantry, whatever vehicle, whatever production or garrison type structure that you want, because we have all of the what in the engine are called modules, but they're essentially components like you would have in Unreal or Unity, that are just ready to go out the door and fully featured. And the people who are taking the Sage engine and messing around with it now have already experienced that there's some things that are just the rudiments of every RTS, and they're already there. And then there's a bunch of stuff that's very, very weird and specific, like a tunnel network. Well, maybe that's generic by now. Anyhow, it's all in there. And the code base is, well, by modern standards, it's actually pretty compact, but at the time it was gigantic. Uh, and compiling the game source code took hours when I first started, which was a development strategy. Is like when you made your changes to your code, you could, Visual Studio would tell you whether you have a compile error in the file that you're working on, but you had no idea whether the game would build until you set it building. And then that was a time where, like, well, I'm going to come back tomorrow and see if it worked.
Wow, okay, that's unexpected. That it would take hours to build. Maybe he's exaggerating a little bit here. Uh, so on my machine, if I compile with the old VC6 compiler that he also used at the time for General 0 hour, it takes, I don't know, I guess we can stop it, but it takes like maybe 10, 15 minutes or so, right? Yeah, so maybe back in the day, the computers were not as great, not as fast, without SSDs, maybe a slower CPUs. It's a build process is on a single thread, so that's a major culprit. Yeah, yeah, I'm a bit surprised about the hours, but maybe if he says like 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, maybe that's reasonable. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, well then, yeah, you need to be strategic about your compiling. Touch as little as possible, right? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, long compile times are bad, but I would imagine that they also used Incredible, some other distributed build system at that time that would distribute the compilation to more machines in a network to get parallel builds and not just use one machine to do the compiling. I would imagine that that was already a thing in 2004. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it was just starting by that time. I'm not sure.
Whereas now, there's nothing like that facing any developers anymore. You have minutes at most
Yeah.
to do a full build.
Okay.
Well, that's not true either. You can still have huge code bases which take very, very long to compile on a local machine. But yeah, those distributed systems, they do help a lot, like Incredible or SNDBS. That's the Sony distributed system, which is free. So yeah, that helps a lot to have more build machines that can help assist in building. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like now that you put it like that, that everything, the Sage engine is generals and everything's built on that. It feels kind of weird that I'm just playing like the most original, basic, oldest version. Like I could be playing a much later version, like the CNC3 and Kane's Wrath, that has way better graphics. But it's a completely different game. There's no other game like Generals and Zero Hour, and all of my viewers will back me up on that. Where, like I said before, the units resemble real life units like the Humvee and the Raptor. Okay, the ion cannon is a bit weird and wacky.
A
Maybe in
bit
the future we'll
sci-fi.
have it.
Yeah.
But like the nuke and the China, and the fact that you can just send a worker or a dozer and build anywhere. The other games are not like that, and those are the reasons why a lot of people gravitate still to this game. Um,
I think there are more reasons why Zero Hour is unique. Zero Hour has like a comical factor, right? With the factions, the way the units speak, it's really comically and beautifully made. Where there's a little bit of irony in all these units and these factions. Right? It doesn't take itself too serious. Like when you play the generals challenges and the opposition is taunting you, right? They put out the most outlandish voice lines, right? So the game doesn't take itself serious, and I think that's good. The worlds and the units are beautifully crafted. The buildings, the soundtrack is good. It still looks good despite being such an old game. It still runs. Oh well, I'm getting myself down hot water. Well, it's a miracle that it still runs. It has performance issues. It has huge stability issues. But I think it's just the experience of the combat. Like you can, the great thing, it's not a slow game. It's not like an Age of Empires where you just build up for a long time, right? You jump straight into the action. You can be in the opponent's base in a minute and a half, maybe, right? And you can start fighting, right? With a minimal amount of units, you can unleash already great damage. So you get into action-packed sequence very, very quickly, right? So if the matchmaking is fast and you discover opponents quickly, which nowadays is difficult, but back in the day it was pretty easy when the games by server was still there. So you just join like a 1v1, 2v2 quick match, 3v3, right? And you will have an action-packed game very, very quickly, swiftly. And it generally was a great experience, other than if it was not for some mismatching or some crashing here and there, right? But generally it was very enjoyable because you have these action-packed, everything is exploding, everything is shooting, your base is going down, you can build it up really fast again, right? So you can do a lot. Like you have a lot of units, abilities, you can fight, you can pick multiple locations to fight, right? You can things work the way you intuitively expect them to work, right? You send this unit there, it shoots, and long range works, and planes work, and helicopters, and so on. So the game just works the way one would expect it to work, and it doesn't do too much, but it also doesn't do too little. I think it's a great mix. I think there is more potential in the game when we can properly polish it and fix all the big issues, and like really polish the services and the functionalities. And yeah, it's just a very entertaining game. It's also entertaining when broadcasting it, right, on YouTube, just for viewers. If you have like a presenter that can really bring the energy with it, right, to present the action, present the competition, then it's a big carnage, right? It can get intense really, really fast, right? So I think it's a great experience for players, but also for viewers. If it wasn't for the issues, right? There's always this caveat. It's a great game. Yeah, it's a great game. Yeah.
Yeah, even though it's the oldest.
Yeah. I love those features too. The sandboxier the RTS, the better in my taste. And what we made is very, very sandboxy.
How did you first get into game development in the first place? Like, did you study at university? Did you always want to get into it, or how did that begin?
I'm a programming autodidact. That means I taught myself.
Wow.
I was programming games on the early Commodore machines. That's the VIC-20 and the 64, back when those were relevant. And I was doing that solo in my bedroom as a teenager.
That's
And
amazing. I did not
I
expect
would
that.
I published my games on bulletin board services for free. And I kind of had to give that up for a little while to do 4 years of college. And then when I came out of college with an art degree, then I tried various jobs and then lucked out in being able to get a job at Sega doing backgrounds. Um, and a lot of what I had learned about how to make computers do stuff was translated well even into that job. Um, there was a time, this is when had formed a company called the Neverhood, and we had a team of 8 in a mixture of programmers and artists, and we had made one game, and then we wanted to make a second one, which was on a different platform and of a different genre, and so we needed a different number of artists and programmers. And I said, well, I'll switch from artist to programmer, because that's the team lineup that we needed. And then I've just been primarily a coder since then.
Okay.
That was in that was in 1996.
So your college, when you went to college to study art,
Mhm.
art as in for games or art as in like paintings? What kind of art are we talking?
It was paintings. Yeah,
Okay.
there was no school that taught games back then.
Okay.
I went to college from 84 to 88. There was no there wasn't you couldn't even study computer graphics, at least not at the school I went to, because they didn't exist. I was the only one doing it
Okay.
um, in college. Um,
So you basically got the job at EA through your experience at Sega and originally through learning it in your bedroom.
Yeah, I mean, by the time I got to EA, I considered myself to be an industry veteran because I had worked at Sega and Shiny and the Neverhood and Monkeytropolis, which is another a company that some friends and I formed, and we never managed to ship a single project, but we stayed in business for 4 years. But the
Oh, okay.
so I mean, with all with I had 9 or 10 games under my belt by then. I felt like I was a captain of industry already by then. And but the skills that I'd learned, like coding in C++, uh, on the PlayStation 1, translated to being able to work on the CNC projects.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this very, I don't know how regular it is, but I would say being self-taught, like having the motivation yourself to work on your own project, I think is very important in this kind of field. Yeah, because I mean you're not going to go to a university or school and you come out and then you just know how everything works and you're ready to go. I think you need to have like a deep interest in these kind of things. You need to have an interest to learn and to try out things, understand, and yeah, I think that's a way to do it. Yeah, if you're not interested in this, you won't do it. But as soon as you motivate yourself to do something because you're interested in it, then you will learn from that experience. You won't like maybe make the greatest game to begin with, right? But you will do something, and hopefully you do something that you enjoy, and then you get better in the process, and then eventually you're done with whatever you started, and then you jump on the next thing, and maybe you take what you learned, and then you do a better job, and then the cycle repeats. And eventually you will work on a real big blockbuster, which makes you proud, right? Or maybe everything you work on makes you proud. That could also be. And yeah, I think that's, yeah, self-taught actually totally makes sense. Yeah, I can affiliate with this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I thought you were going to say you studied at university for 8 years. You got a computer science degree and in programming, But yeah, I'm wrong.
No, back then those things kind of didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
and most of the people that like were peers in the industry, they were people who had taught themselves, or they had gotten a hold of an Amiga and learned how to do graphics, just as a pre-early adopter of those technologies. Just the nerdiest people, or the people who were hobbyists and enthusiasts, were the ones who knew anything about it, and nobody else did. And the people who wanted to have games made and pay to develop and publish them, they were out just looking for all the nerds. Somebody who knew more than nothing about how to do that work, and it was a select few people
Okay.
back then.
Um, with like the very quick development over the last couple of years of like AI, and I see more and more that AI is going to be able to do coding or already can do coding. How do you see that impacting jobs like yours or game creation in general? Do you see game development being much quicker, like assisting, or do you see AI making whole games, or have you thought about
Um,
that?
there's a lot of bluster about AI making whole games, but it isn't real. I think that may well be in our future, but it is not currently true. Um, when you see people who are promoting their latest AI and they say, "Look, I'm going to give it a prompt and say I want a game that is both Candy Crush and Tetris," and then like it churns on it, and then you can play it 10 minutes later. Like, okay, Candy Crush and Tetris, but that's that's pretty rudimentary. Um, but you couldn't say, for example, I want to play a game that feels like the natural next iteration of Call of Duty, but I want to have an ink gun like in um, Splatoon.
Hmm.
The it can't do that. It can't even begin to understand what you're talking about.
Okay.
So the but a human could. A human would hear that pitch and say like, "Oh yeah, I know exactly what I would need to do, and it's going to take this many people and this many months and this many millions of dollars."
Hmm.
Um, and so it's still true that it takes humans and it takes time and it takes money to
Yeah.
to 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 actually create and innovate and make something that's novel and interesting to the player. One thing that I see happening is that the developers can do what is now called vibe coding, which means that you have you have the AI next to you while you're coding, and you say like, "Oh, I forget what's the algorithm for a doubly linked list bubble sort," and so you just ask it like, "Hey, give me this, and I need it in Python, and I want it with the following commenting style," and so it'll go. And you just
Okay.
drop it in, and then three times out of five, it'll actually build and do what you expect, and the rest of the time, it's lying to you.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. It's just burgeoning, but it is useful. Um, and I can, the AI is better than a search engine for finding answers to your development questions because it can do a deep search, and um, it can it's more efficient at typing out code than you are, and so you can have it save you time and labor by doing that. And it can remember things you forgot, and so it's good for that. And
Okay.
and it, like, let's say that there's some like theory of linear algebra that I just don't understand. Like I don't understand how I can compute a deflection using the cross product from an input vector. And so then you just ask the AI and like, oh yeah, thanks. That makes perfect sense because it knows it can go and read all the articles on the subject and tell you what they mean. That's where I think it's the most useful now.
Yeah.
There's a time in the future when you can just describe a game you'd like to play and then you're just playing it, but I don't know how long it will be until then. maybe it's years.
Yeah.
I agree with his take on that. The AI development is not, at least I haven't seen it, it's not yet there where you just make one prompt or two prompts and then you have like a fully fledged game with all these different systems. And this is all like, you also need to consider like machine generated code may not be code that you can actually maintain, but maybe it's just code that a machine can maintain. So if you generate code just through the means of the machine, then you may end up with something that you cannot maintain yourself until a certain point, because the systems that it put you that gave it to you, like no one can understand it. It's just so verbose and so all over the place, and code duplication, everything, and it's not beautifully crafted. It's not crafted by a human for a human, but it's crafted by a machine to just do what the prompt asked it to do, right? So you would need to refine your prompt to say, okay, please refactor this code to not to be a bit more understandable and maintainable or whatever, right? And then maybe the machine can do that, but then maybe it introduces some bugs, right, that you are not aware about, because the machine won't tell you that it introduced those bugs. And if you don't have the knowledge of what the machine actually does, then that will go unnoticed. So it's a bit risky to just trust entirely and just wipe codes, because you may get like something fast out the door, but maybe it's not exactly the way you would want it to be long term, right? To have all these levers to properly modify it exactly the way you want it to be, and to be in a state where you actually as the author understand all the intricacies of the system, right? So I think there's great value in doing things the traditional way right now. Maybe there's a future, as Mark said, that you just give it a prompt and then it creates you a fully fledged game with all these 3D assets, all the code, all the scripts, all the maps, all the textures, the models, everything is there. But um, it, it seems unlikely. It seems unlikely that this will be there anytime soon. But then again, AI is moving very fast, so maybe AI can learn from games and just build games from existing games really fast. Who knows? Who knows? Right. But certainly AI is a great assistant to help you build things, not just code, but also textures and models and worlds, and right. So AI is a great as an assistant, right, to help you understand things, like you said, with like being a search engine, or to give you code snippets that you can then use and correct and polish and use for your product. And yeah, I think AI is fantastic, but it just augments the programmer. So I use it as a search engine most of the time, right? I ask it questions. Hey, how does this work? How can I do that, right? What does this do, right? It's like a personal assistant. It's great to just like, hey, please teach me. How do I do that? Or give it like give like a hint on what can I do, the possibilities, right? I think it's one common thing, like it's hard to get into something that you don't even know exists, right? That's one of the fundamental problems. Like, how do you get into something that you don't even know exists? And I think AI is great because it shows you like a way. You ask, hey, is there any precedent for this kind of thing that I want, right? Is there anything, does anything describe what I want? Is there anything else that does that, right? And then the AI maybe can figure out, yeah, there's this topic, maybe we can explore that, right? And then, oh, there's that thing, look at that, right? And then you go from there, and then you go forward. Otherwise, you can search it in Google search engine or so, right? But that maybe is more tedious to find, right? If it's a very specific knowledge. Yeah, AI is great, but it's not the silver bullet. What I see very often in my comments is, well, not often, but I did see it sometimes popping up like, hey, just put the game into the AI and it will have it fixed in 1 hour, right? That's what I read, and by some users. But my takeaway is that this user doesn't know what he's talking about. That's my take on it. You can't put this game into an AI and it will fix it in 1 hour. That's impossible. You can try, maybe it will fix some things and show you some things and so, right? But yeah, I don't think it at this time that won't work. I don't think so. You can prove me wrong. I haven't seen it yet. Yeah.
And when that time comes, then the powerful people are going to be the ones making the AIs, and those of us who have the specialized skill to laboriously coax a computer into making an experience, might eventually be obsolete, but I don't think it's soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the same in a lot of industries. Even in my job now, we use AI to assist us. Sometimes it gets it wrong. A lot of the time, it does help us and assist us, but it can't yet fully do the job. I totally agree of a human just yet. But yeah, we live in exciting and maybe scary times with how powerful that might get in the future. Have you seen the old Sage Engine testing footage that they posted on the Command and Conquer YouTube channel? It was like the really old days from like 2002 or 2003.
I was around in 2002, 2003, so it's probably something that I've seen. But no, I don't know that I've seen any kind of repost of some vintage footage. That would be interesting to see. I do know that I remember seeing the demo reel that was from the demo that where Generals was shown at E3. And in fact, that's how I got the job. Is I went to E3 and I saw the demo. I saw the producers demoing the game live at E3, and they said, "And we're hiring." And so I applied.
Okay.
So are you talking about a scene where like a bunch of buggies come and blast a dam and then it floods a canyon or something like that?
Uh,
You're talking about something else.
that might be in it. It's basically, I think it's like a 30-minute video. It's mixed with Renegade, like some cut Renegade scenes or something like
Right,
that.
right. Yeah, Renegade
But
would have inherited some of the same code that Sage did from early Westwood titles and from there's actually code in the Sage engine from Dune 2, which is the original RTS. Um, so yeah, I mean, all of the games that came through the Westwood history have a lot of sharing and commonality
okay.
across.
So yeah, there's like some really old footage. It kind of, you can tell it's gonna become Generals, but it's like really early days. And there's some units there that I don't recognize, so they could well be from June 2. There's like some weird looking tanks and stuff like that. So
It's possible. Although Generals is a 3D rendering engine, and Dune was 2D. That was 2D sprites.
oh, okay.
Um, that was on the Sega Genesis.
Yeah, yeah, there was some weird looking tank. It might have been a mammoth tank in there as well. But yeah, things that weren't in Generals, but they were clearly testing and building this Sage engine. If you get a chance, check it out.
Well, yeah, I'd like to see that. I'll try to find it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Does it surprise you that they released the source code after all of these years? Because obviously they did the source code release. They made a new patch 1.05, which doesn't really do that much apart from enable like the Steam Workshop and adds a new little menu so you can play missions easily from the Steam Workshop, plus a few little fixes. But and they also did that video I just mentioned to you. That was kind of like the news in the release, but we were most excited about the source code. Did that surprise you? They did that.
I was surprised, pleasantly surprised. I've always had kind of a nostalgia for this code base, I guess you'd say, because it was a place where I had learned so much. Um, and it was my first exposure to a lot of what are now considered standard coding patterns and practices were manifest in the Sage engine, the component model that all of the modern third-party game engines are based on. That was fully realized in our code base decades before. Um, and so, to, in a way, it's kind of a time capsule. And another way of looking at it is that it's kind of a toolkit for anyone who wants to roll their own engine, I suppose, or leverage the engine as it exists and find new ways of leveraging its core systems. I don't know whether anyone else is experiencing it, but to look at the Sage code and then compare it to modern game code, I think would be a very educational experience just to see how those ideas have evolved and what parts of the general's code base, which were mature, 20, 25 years ago, um, and which parts are still relevant and which parts have changed. And because if you can see that trajectory between the way things were 25 years ago, with the way they are now, and interpolate the journey between the two, then maybe you can extrapolate where things are going.
Yeah. Okay.
It's good to hear that he is happy, surprised. Yeah. I think code quality is somewhere like it's not too shabby, but it's also not too great, I would say. So, I mean, there's a lot of work needed to like polish and make the code more robust. There's a lot of raw pointers are being used, like new delete, and that's very error prone, and we see that like there's a lot of heap use after free and double deletes, or memory errors, right, which are never good. And so there are some bad principles, or they also don't use any events kind of pattern. So like everything has to be manually managed, right? You have this system and you have to like tell the system that you are dead, right? Or something like that. Like there's no concept of broadcasting events to tell, hey, this object is now dead and anyone can listen to it and then do something when this dies, right? Have like a callback or so, right? So it's all like this object needs to know about all these different systems that it interacts with and unregister itself, and like everything knows about everything. So there's no like decoupling of responsibility. Like everyone needs to be aware about what it is. So yeah, I think there's probably some good principles, but also bad principles. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's just there's always something that can be improved. Yeah, that's the way I see it. What I've seen so far, like for example, what is also bad, there are files that have a lot of loose functions, like C-style functions that don't belong into any class, and they're just gigantic functions with 1,000+ lines, and it's really like it does too many things. These functions do too, and that's bad. Right? These things need to be split apart. They need to put into classes properly. The problem with with functions in the CPP is that you need to put the functions in the correct order. Otherwise, the functions don't see them, or you need to forward declare the functions at the very top. So like you have this order dependency, but if you just put it in a class, and it just always works, and everything sees itself in the class. Right? So yeah, there's a lot of dirt, but I think the foundation is okay, that you can stabilize it and then build on top and improve it over time. Yeah, and refactor this piece and that and make it nicer, and it entangle the mess. It certainly is possible, but I wouldn't say that it's great. No, it's not bad, it's not great, it's just 0 hour. Yeah.
Okay. Did you have a look through the source code and find any of your old comments or anything? You did, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was a very prolific commenter. Um, and I mean, other than putting my name as the author on the top of a file that I had authored, but like I would be going in and fixing a bug, and then I would put a little 2-inch rant under it about like why it's such bad practice to do this, or how it was that this snuck by the testing process, and what are the tendrils of this bug? And so then I would always sign it with my initials MLO, which is M for Mark, LO for Lorenzen. Um,
Yeah.
and I only added the O to differentiate me from somebody else who had the ML initials. But the before long, everyone on the team started calling me MLO. And they probably still know me by that name. Like if you said, "Hey, Mark Lorenzen is being interviewed," like, "Who's that?" "It's MLO." "Oh, yeah, yeah, MLO." So,
Okay.
so it's a weird self or organically evolved nickname that stuck.
Do you have any idea why EA would release the source code after so many years? Do you think it's like to try and boost sales, or a gift for the community, or do you think it's anything to do with the release, like of
Well,
Tempest Rising that just got released?
it's good for EA to have a gesture of goodwill, and so that's definitely a thing. Um, it- I don't know what the genesis of the idea was. Um, I bet if you could ask Jim Vasella, he would know because
Yeah,
he
yeah,
was probably part of that choice.
yeah. True.
Um, so I don't know what started the conversation, but there's a lot of reasons, or a lot of good justifications for why they did it. And it builds excitement. Um, it 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 probably is elevating awareness of the indie dev community and the gaming community about EA's earlier game libraries, which might be something that they're gonna be repackaging. That's just a guess.
What does that mean? Libraries, are they like all the models?
No, I mean like different product lines.
Okay.
Like I don't know, Medal of Honor games, for example.
Okay.
They made a lot of Medal of Honor games and then stopped. So
Okay.
it'd be cool if we could, how you have like what was it called, the CNC, the first decade or something like that, and you could
Yeah.
get Generals and Zero Hour and Red Alert and all of them all in one bundle.
Yeah.
That would be cool if EA was going to be bundling like all of the cool stuff that they were making over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Medal of Honor. I remember that. I used to play that on the day of release. A few of those games. Yeah, they were really good.
Mhm.
So you basically think that the reason for EA releasing the source code is more of a gesture of goodwill and to highlight the indie developers.
I don't know, but it is a gesture of goodwill,
Yeah.
even if that wasn't the genesis of the idea. Um, because there's a lot of people who are have very happy things to talk um,
Mhm.
about having exposure to this source code, and um, I don't know, maybe it will be helpful to EA's recruitment efforts. I don't know. I can only conjecture along with everyone else what the reason was.
Yeah.
It's funny that he tries to rationalize it, but it doesn't have an answer to this. Yeah. Um, the view that I have now is that it simply was something that was pushed internally at EA. Hey, let's make this happen, and then it was signed off, and then it happened. So, like someone put the seed, and with someone, we probably look at CC Hyper, right? CC Hyper, Jim Vasella, that was mentioned, right? So these guys put the seed and they made it happen. What their personal motivations for this were exactly, I don't know, but I assume that I don't know CC Hyper. Like I've never heard of him before. Like he's not active in the General Zero Hour community. right? He's not a. I haven't seen him ever play. He never participated in a tournament or a challenge or in an interview or like you have never seen him over the last 20 years, right? It was just recently that he stepped in there. So I don't know why he would push for 0 hours specifically, right? Because as far as I'm aware, he's not as involved, right, with the game community, right? So yeah, I don't know what the exact motivations were, but maybe he thought, yeah, it is possible, so we can try, right? Because 0 hour is probably an easier push than CNC3, right? CNC3 is newer and probably uses maybe more proprietary libraries, and it's a newer title, so maybe it's a bit tougher to get that released, right? But yeah, I think we can be. I think it doesn't matter. We can just be happy that it is. It came to be the way it is now. I think that is all that really matters. Yeah, I also never thought that this would happen, but now it happened, and I think it's great. Yeah, that's the way it should be, right? Yeah. Why would EA do it? Because they should. Yeah.
It definitely helped in terms of like viewers on streams and the downloads on Steam. Yeah, just general activity. I mean, the only reason I was speaking to Chris is because of that release. He found us on Discord, and then now I'm speaking to you. So it does create a lot of hype. So
yeah, it's interesting that Dominator only said it from the streamer perspective and Steam game sales. But for me, obviously, it is being able to fix the game. That's the biggest effect that this has, which trumps everything. So I don't care if it generated views. What matters is that we can now fix the game. That's a core issue. And then when the game is polished, and beyond that, to make it a more worthwhile experience. And yeah, there's just so much work. There's so much potential. So I mean, we can draw a huge roadmap, but for now, I think we need to focus on the most obvious things that add to frustration with the game, and that right now is stability. That's a big thing. Yeah, if we can get the game stable, I think that would be the first great milestone that marks the beginning of the community patch journey. Yeah, I hope it will be great.
Yeah.
do you watch any 0 hour streams or replays, or have you seen it recently or even played it?
I do from time to time find somebody who's on Twitch or YouTube of somebody who's doing their voiceover comedy shtick on top of the game that they're playing. That's good entertainment. It has the same feel as back in the day when we would play and razz each other and nerd out about the way that this guy plays versus that guy.
Yeah.
It's a new fun medium that didn't exist back then. You couldn't just watch a stream of somebody playing 0 hour. You had to actually be there in real life and watch it happen live. But now people can share that experience with thousands, and so it's fun to be the audience of that now.
Yeah.
And it kind of warms my heart when they're talking about, they say like, "Oh, I love this power," or "I love this unit," and they're like, "Yeah, that was me."
Yeah, I remember when I was little and when I was growing up, we had it was a 56K modem and a dial-up. You'd have to sit there wait for it to dial up, and then I'd be playing Counter-Strike, and it would be the laggiest game ever. If I wanted to play at real speed, we'd go to a big LAN party where 20 guys would get together, and we'd swap pirated stuff occasionally. So yeah, it's changed a lot actually. Now you mention it, now that I can just play a game, boot up a stream, And sometimes during the finals, we have like 2,500 live viewers watching two of the best players go head to head.
Yeah.
Does that surprise you? The fact that we can get so many viewers and so much sponsorship, because we have a lot of sponsorship too for
It,
Zero Hour in 2025.
I don't really know anything about the sponsorship, but I don't think it surprises me, but it's a pleasure to see that you can get that much interest and that much audience into people who want to play something that I worked on so many years back. Um, for me, it's the old days and it's nostalgia, but if it still has that kind of relevance, meaning that I was part of making an experience that still has value, and so that feels really good.
That's
Um,
cool.
I mean, that's the single thing that motivates me to stay in this industry is I want to make experiences and for the people who experience that to maybe feed back to me like how that felt.
Yeah.
Um, that's that's why I'm still at it.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's really cool to hear. Really, really nice to hear. Um, just comparing that to any other games that I think you said you worked on like 33 games or so. Out of all of those games, which is like your biggest today that people still actively play? Uh, would you say? Do you know?
Um, I wasn't a coder on The Sims, but I was an engineering team lead on an intermediate effort in The Sims 3 to port it to consoles. So that's certainly the kind of an anchor, meaning if somebody just standing in the grocery line says, "Hey, what games did you work on?" I would say, "Well, have you heard of The Sims?" Uh,
Yeah,
and they go, "Oh yeah, I have a niece who's addicted to that."
super popular.
Um,
I used to be addicted to that way back.
yeah. So I mean that of all the games I've worked on, I mean if you rewind all the way back to Earthworm Jim or Vector Man, like in their day, those were huge, immensely popular games. But um, I don't know, there are maybe vanishingly fewer people left who remember that. Um,
Which one was that? Sorry,
the Earthworm Jim or Vector
Earthworm
Man.
Jim.
I mean these were
I've
on
heard of
the
that.
Sega
Did I play
Genesis.
that? Earthworm Jim. Is it like Digging Jim or not?
Well,
No.
there's a
Uh,
digging level that I made for it, but the it's just this cartoony game about a superhero worm in a super muscle suit.
Okay, yeah. There's a game called Digging Jim, which is it's just different. I used to play that. I think on the Amiga or something like that. The Amiga, way back. But yeah, Earthworm
I
Jim. I've never
don't know
seen
that.
that before actually.
Oh, well, see that demonstrates my point. It's like this. It's like it's a whole prior generation of fans.
Mhm.
I don't know. I wonder if I did the math. Like, how old is an Earthworm Jim fan now? 40, maybe 45.
So following the source code, there's a group of people now, as you maybe have seen, that are delving through that source code and they're trying to create like a community patch full of improvements, like maybe to the expensiveness of certain particles and fixing desyncs and all of that stuff. We're hoping within like 12 months or maybe 2 years, we'll have like an amazing game that like works perfectly because there's a few bugs like we've talked about.
Yeah.
Once we get that, do you see any like long-term future for Generals? Do you think we'll ever see a Generals 2 from EA, for example?
Well, was Zero Hour not Generals too? The sorry, that's
Could say that, yeah. Or
I mean that was its working title, by the way.
oh, was it? It was Generals
Yeah,
2.
I mean yeah, in-house for a few months until someone came up with a name. But
Yeah.
the so actual Generals sequel that is in that universe and leverages the same engine and that would be supremely cool. I would want to work on that. the the thing is, I would want to port the Sage engine to Unity first and then work on that because
Yeah.
that's going to be that would be an easy transition, I think. And I don't know whether anyone is doing that, like making an Unreal or a Unity implementation of Sage. Um, but the
Um, I think I think EA released some rules or I don't know what you call it, the copyright thing, and it basically said that you're not allowed to do that. I think I don't know if you're allowed to do it for a personal project, but definitely not allowed to do it for like commercial use. But yeah, I don't know
well,
if you're physically able to.
well, if it's commercial, then there's powers that be
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
I can't affect. But the yeah, I mean, Sage was kind of at the peak of the strength of proprietary engine development, and the whole thing is implemented in C++, which is various layers down to some proprietary libraries that are all implemented in C++, and then a very weak data driving layer on top of that. And so that set the stage for all modern game development that we have right now, including um, Unity and Unreal and Frostbite and CryEngine and everything else that you see, and all the things that they share in common, and that if you learn one, you can learn the other ones. All of that is you could say is learned from Sage, but what Sage doesn't have is uh, an editor environment where you can have the inspectors and see out everything that's running. You have to use a debugger for that. Um, so I mean that's why I had added my anecdote that I'd want to convert it to a modern development environment, just because the efficiency of that environment would allow new things to be made by smaller teams and faster.
Okay.
Because if we had those engines back in 2000, it wouldn't have taken as long and it would have taken fewer people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would it feel the same though if you ported it into Unreal Engine? Like, would it be the same game or would it? Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea about this topic,
But
but
that's a good question. And that kind of a theme has come up in the past about how there was a magic that was in the oldest of the old games, like back when solo coders were making the game in 6502 assembler, or back in the 70s and 80s. Like why how did those games feel like such miracles, whereas games built on the modern platforms feel so drab and lifeless? And that's kind of an ironic twist, because you're building on hardware that is feeble and capable of almost nothing, and in an environment that's so cryptic and so um, alien to human involvement, and that such magic came from that. And then now that we have Unreal Engine, there's so much boring crud. So I don't know that. I mean, I can philosophize about it, um, and
yeah.
it might have something to do with laziness.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a real thing. There's magic from back when there were no easy engines that has never been recaptured.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, the other game I can think of where people play the older version is like Age of Empires 2, where I've played Age of Empires 4 and the graphics and everything looks really cool. And to me, I'd just play, oh yeah, just play this one. But I see the player base for like Age of Empires 2, which the graphics look way worse, but people just all flock to that. I think it has like many times fold of more players than Age of Empires 4. But I don't know if that's the same story, but
Maybe.
I think I already put my take on it in a previous developer reaction video that I did. Is that I don't think that the graphical aspect is such a big deal for the game, but he also mentioned like the tooling, that then like the iteration speed or development would be faster. Uh, I'm not sure. I mean, what components are there? You have the maps, for which you use a world builder. You have the models, for which you use 3D Studios Max or um, maybe a Blender, right? And for textures, you use Photoshop. You have audio, which you use some audio software for. The animations, they are part of the 3D models. You have the scripts, which you can use any text editor for. You have the source code, which you use Visual Studio for. Um, I don't know what kind of tooling there would help do things. I don't know. Maybe like that you have like what you see is what you play editor, but World Builder, yeah, it's not really. You cannot play in World Builder, right? So I guess, yeah, being able to edit the map as you play the game, like that probably would be a useful thing, right? Generals doesn't have that, so that probably would be a big thing, yeah. But otherwise, like the way you craft the game, yeah, you have a lot of custom tools. Like the GUI also is custom, right? Everything's custom. Would a switch to an engine make it all so much better? I don't know. I don't know. It, you would have to recreate then things like, let's say you use a different framework for the UI, or then you have to recreate the UI, make it work on the new framework. You can either choose to polish the existing one, extend it, or maybe replace certain portions, improve it, or you replace the entire thing. But yeah, I don't know. The game is just made from different components that use different tools to craft these things. Yeah, I don't know how Unreal and Unity would make that experience better. It certainly would be a big engine upgrade, as to like it would give you so much more functionality and features, and the the engine, it would give you access to all the latest renderers and technologies, and yeah, maybe there's some great benefit to it, but I think fundamentally for the core gameplay loop, it's not critical. But I would say if someone wants to give this a serious try, then yeah, sure, do it, and then one can see how it looks and feels, and then go from there. Personally, I think it's not critical, because there are much more important topics uh, than engine stuff. Yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's some kind of purity that comes from the simplicity, I think, too.
Yeah.
And maybe that forces some element of focus on the kind of experience that's made, is because you only have so much capability and so much energy to put into it, that you end up synthesizing down to the purest good of the potential experience. Whereas if you have infinite capabilities and infinite resources, you just splatter that all over because it doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I wrote here, do you have any funny stories from the time you worked on Generals and Zero Hour? You kind of already told me, though, your supply truck rush. Is there
The supply
anything
truck
else?
rush. Well, do you have any plans to interview Graham Smallwood by any chance?
I
Because
have him on Discord. There is a plan.
that
Yeah, it's
he
taken
would
a
be
while, but
a good next interview, because you have Chris's perspective, and now you have mine,
yeah.
and his would be like the next one on that
Okay.
list. Um, I like Chris, and I like Graham a lot. They're
Yeah.
really, really fun to work with, and I learned a lot from them. Um,
Okay.
I for a time I sat across, just like my cubicle and his were separated by a partition, and so I had to listen to all of Graham's um, outbursts and anecdotes and things like that. And it was more fun than playing generals was listening to Graham talk. He's just funny. Um,
Yeah.
so here's an anecdote story of like a bug that I fixed, and it was just a miracle. Like sometimes I'm convinced that I have a split personality and that the other one of me is really smart because um, but there was this desync bug in the product that was just days, I think, from going live, and it was a severe one. Like every time you would fire the artil fire one of the artillery units and then uh, scroll. No, you would fire your artillery unit while it was on screen for your opponent, and then
Uh,
they would move their camera away from it while it was firing. And those were the conditions. And so it's a real head scratcher. And so they brought it to the engineering team, which at that moment was just Graham and me sitting there in our cubicles. And so we like, okay, we're gonna jump on it. And so then like I could hear Graham and he was like plowing through code and looking for things. And I was just sitting there thinking, and and I managed to put it all together. And I told the story. I said, Graham, let's see if this makes sense. And I talked him through it. And
yeah.
he says, you're an effing genius. And I said, I am, because I was right.
Okay.
And I'm not that smart, but the other me sometimes just like intervenes without me noticing and says something smart. Um, But I mean that I never felt better than I did on that day because I was able to find a bug that was in the code of the smartest guy on the team. And and I felt like I was maybe among the stupidest guys on the team, and I found that bug, and I did it intuitively, and and uh, and Graham just made me feel so good by what he had to say.
Yeah, I've only spoke to Graham a few times on Discord, but he already seems like an interesting character. Just like the use of his vocabulary and his sentences and stuff, I can tell
Yeah.
he's gonna be a funny guy. I can tell.
Yeah, he has a very peculiar way of phrasing things and quite a bit of bluster. Um, and I know I haven't talked to him in many years, but I'll bet he's still the same. Um, but yeah, his perspective would be it would finish the triangle, I think, after talking to Chris and then me.
Yeah.
I think Graham spent less time than Chris and I on Zero Hour, but he made a few contributions to it. Um, So that would
Okay.
be the third guy to talk to.
Hmm. Yeah, I'll make sure that happens. It sounds interesting. So you mentioned your story about desyncs. Now we're all too familiar in Zero Hour actually about it says in the game mismatches, so we call it mismatches, but desyncs same thing I think.
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah, sometimes you might be playing a 50-minute game and everything's running perfectly, and all of a sudden it seems like nothing's changed, but all of a sudden you just get a mismatch and the game just quits out, and there's no way you can ever replay that. So I briefly spoke to Chris about it, and he mentioned that obviously it's peer to peer, and when your PC is different to the enemies, then a mismatch can happen. But like, in your
Yeah.
opinion or your view, why, or could you explain to like newbies to this why that might happen after you're playing 50 minutes? Everything seems normal, but all of a sudden you just might get a mismatch. Why does that happen?
Well, the after 50 minutes thing, it could just be a matter of that the odds of encountering something that occurs at random increases the longer you play. Um, Although it could also be something that is leaking, and that's why if you're talking about a bug where it always happens after 50 minutes, then that's interesting information too, because
Mm.
that kind of tells the story about some kind of a state that evolves into a desynchronized mismatch over that much time, or perhaps something that is leaking. Leaking is in computer terms means that the um, memory is being spent and not reclaimed, and that can cause perhaps a collection to grow to a size where the code that serializes it doesn't access the whole of the code anymore, perhaps, or something like that.
Okay.
Or
I disagree with that statement. I don't think that memory leaks will cause these things. Maybe he's confusing it with something. Well, memory leak, it just means there's a wasted memory. The pool just keeps on growing. You have waste in your RAM, and the process just keeps growing. So there's a danger of out of memory crash, right? If you hit the ceiling of 2 GB in the Win32 process, then the game will crash. But that shouldn't increase the chance of mismatch. What could maybe introduce mismatch is memory corruption. So something corrupts the state. Something is writing over the state, or you're using memory after free, right? So you are using memory that is not what it is expected to be, right? Because there's some logical error which either frees something before we finally use it, or something else that overwrites our pristine information, right? Something like this. And then, yeah, you could have like a wrong state. And that can be different from one machine to another because like the memory pattern may not be the exact same. Especially when the game didn't run exactly the same sequence of logical events, right? So if you run, let's say you played 2 matches on one client and the other client only played 0 matches, and then these 2 clients match together, and one for the third match and the other in the first match, right? Then maybe what happened in the first 2 matches on the one client has a bad influence on his game state compared to the other who doesn't have that, right? And then maybe there could be a mismatch caused by this, right? So hopefully you would clean up properly after each session, purge all the state so that you start fresh in the new session, right? So that, all the clients start the simulation fresh at the same, with the same state, which as far as I'm aware is not entirely the case. So for example, there is a bug with something with a power. I forgot the exact repro, but there's a bug when you exit the game, when you have low power, a saboteur in the power plant or something like this, and then you exit the game, and then that client starts a new match, and then he still has negative power, and then it mismatches because that other client doesn't have that bug, and yeah, the game state is not the same anymore, and then things go to shit, right? So I don't see the leak thing, but yeah, maybe he just confused it with something. Or maybe I'm not aware about some constellation. That could also be. But I'm pretty confident about what I'm saying. So that's fine.
or exceeds a boundary of a buffer. I'm talking in coding terms here.
Yeah.
So
I think
maybe
I
the people
vaguely
who
understand what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. The peer-to-peer thing, it was out of necessity back in the day because the network performance wasn't up to the state where we could simply exchange the simulated state of the game to all of the peers, with some kind of server-side authority in the simulation. So, like Chris explained in his interview, all of the local clients are running the simulation synchronously and are sharing a stream of input that's common to all of the clients. So basically all of your mouse clicks and keystrokes and drag gestures and things are being serialized and sent across the network to the host, which then distributes all of those events out to all the peers, and then all the peers react to that. And what is supposed to happen is that they react to it in exactly the same way. And thus, all the various simulations are doing exactly the same thing all the time. There's considerable overhead in developing that way because you have to make sure that um, what's considered logic side and client side concerns are separate from each other. And that was the one of the problems with that story I was telling is that if you move the camera off of your artillery unit, then it stops rendering its animated skeleton that pitches the barrel. And if it isn't animating the skeleton, then it goes and retrieves the pitch on the skeleton that was left the last time it was on camera, and then it shoots the projectile out from that point. And so the point is different, meaning that the shell gets launched from a different point for somebody who has the unit on their screen from it does for the somebody who had it on their screen but doesn't anymore.
Okay.
And the solution to that was to stop examining the animated skeleton instead. Look at some other thing that remains the same across all of the simulations. If I was going to try to
Before he goes into his idea, I think there is a certain beauty in the way that it's implemented with a simulation being replicated on every client. Is that like every client computes the game state in the same way, which allows for like being able to simulate this without even being able without the necessity to render that thing, right? You can have a headless client that just renders, that just goes through the replay without ever rendering anything to the screen, and you can go from start to finish, play back the whole thing. Right now, obviously, for the general user, that is not much of a use, but it's great for us. For example, right now that we are able to like verify correctness of our game client against retake compatible replays and see like if we made any change that broke the simulation, right? So the replay feature, being able to replay, the sequence of commands and then generate the simulation out of it, is actually a really powerful tool. I think it's really good, and it's something that should be preserved for 0 hour, even if it's hard to maintain and to correctly implement. But I think just given enough thoughtfulness put into developing towards this kind of implementation, I think should be able to evolve this into like a well-functioning product that is stable and it doesn't mismatch. So I don't take issue with how it is implemented, but certainly if we find ways to improve it, then yeah, we can explore that, and it looks like he will go into that now.
to solve the big problem of desyncs, I would depart from the peer-to-peer model completely, and I would just serialize the state of every unit in the simulation and exchange that state across the network because we have the bandwidth to do that now.
Okay, so it would be like we'd all connect to a server, not peer-to-peer anymore.
We could still have have it be peer-to-peer and have a host, but
okay.
I would say that you'd want to have the host's simulation to be authoritative,
Okay.
and for the remote peers to be non-authoritative. So they're all running in parallel, but the state from the host machine is being broadcast, and then each client is comparing to that state.
Wow.
And if
Okay.
it mismatches, then you just say, well, then I'll throw my state away and take the one from the host.
Okay.
And because that's possible now, that's the solution. That's the easy blanket solution. And it also makes the game so much easier to implement new features.
That's really cool. I've never heard of that theory before. I always thought it was peer-to-peer, or you connect to a server, and that's it.
Well, in that case, the host machine is the server.
Yeah. Okay.
And in 0 hour there is a server because the server is responsible for remembering the leaderboard and matchmaking and all those kinds of things. So the server does exist. It's just that it's not involved in the simulation.
Mm-hmm.
It matches peers together. One of them is chosen as the host, and then off they go. They play the game, and the results are then packaged up and sent back to the server that remembers the results. Um, so we could keep that model too, because the host machine is already running the simulation, as are all of the peers. But we might as well just say, like, okay, the host machine is the authority, and it's going to serialize the whole game state and send it to all of the
Okay.
peers, and that the whole problem would go away.
And is that quite a simple thing to do in your opinion, in the
No,
grand scheme?
no, no.
No.
It would require somebody who has in-depth knowledge of an engine and um, high-level implementations. Um, there's a system in the engine called the XFER, which is transfer abbreviated, which is a binary serialization solution for um, the game state, and so that's used to save and load the game. It's used to kind of take a quick imprint, it uses a CRC check on all of the XFIR data to compare with the other clients to detect the desync. Because you have to, even though all of the clients are simulating independently and synchronously, you need to be able to know when that stops being true. And so the way that's done is by serializing all the state of everything and coming up with a little table of small integers and then seeing whether that table matches the other peer's table. And if it doesn't, then the odd man out gets kicked out of the game, or everybody just gets a desync error, and like, oh man, all the fun stops.
Yeah.
Um, but since we're doing that serialization step already, my thought is, well, let's just take the serialized data and put it in a packet and send it to all the other peers. And if a desync happens, then they can just consume that.
Mhm.
Um, it would take weeks to implement that, I think,
Okay.
for me having the in-depth understanding of how the engine works.
In a few weeks, you alone could do that.
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, because all of that other code I was talking about, that's already there.
Yeah.
Um, and it's already doing its work. Uh, so there just need to be a layer that could consume um, the what is essentially a save file
Hmm.
of the game. So there's this binary footprint of data that can be saved out and then loaded back in to restore the game state. Since that already works, then just save the game at runtime, send the save file out to all the other peers, and if they desync, then they just load. And now you
Okay.
aren't desynced anymore.
So obviously we have this group of voluntary.
Okay, some thoughts on this. I think let me see. In I think I had here some topic. So the user Tarnished Knight, he was the first one who like brought up this here in our project that we work on. It was posted in something called Observer. Let's see. Lightweight Match Observer. Right. So here I suggested it would be great to have like be able to connect to a stream of a replay to like allow many an infinite amount of observers to connect to a replay and watch it as a replay is being written to a server, right? And I think there was a post by here, Lost Skrill, aka Tarnished Knight. He says, perhaps one approach is to use a client-server model instead of peer-to-peer. We do that in Bar. That is Beyond All Reason. That's another open source strategy game that he works on. The idea is that a simple server schedules simulation frames. Clients send their commands. The server ties the commands to the next available simulation frame and then sends the simulation frame with all associated commands to the clients. The clients can then execute the simulation frames. This solution has the following benefits. It scales with the number of players, spectators in linear complexity rather than exponential. The server keeps a history of simulation frames so spectators can connect after the match has started and will be able to watch. Players can reconnect to a match if they desync. The server passes a history and the player can catch up. The server history is also the replay, so you have a central repository of replays. Such a server is lightweight, it doesn't run the simulation. Because it only takes the commands and then it, sends it away. I think that's a great proposal. I really like this one. I think the suggestion from Mark goes even further because that appears to give the server even more responsibility to actually run the simulation, right? So what Mark Lorenzen suggests goes beyond this suggestion. Whether this this dedicated server is even a better implementation, I don't know. I mean, it would have to be tested. As he said, it will incur more network traffic. I don't know. Then it would mean it would mean that some other things could fail. If you have this dedicated server, then it means that if this dedicated server fails, then the whole session fails, right? Whereas if you have the peer-to-peer model, then if one client drops, the whole thing just keeps on going, right? Also, personally, I'm not a fan of having one host, like one client that is a host, because that gives too much power and too much responsibility to that one client, because that would mean that this one host client could then do cheating, right? And the other clients that are slaves of that host client would have to obey that overlord client, right? So that I'm not a fan of. If there is a dedicated server, then that would be something that runs on a remote server that doesn't belong to a player, right? So it runs in the cloud where the next to where the matchmaking server is, the GameSpy server or any other replacement for the lobbies, right? So that guy would spawn this dedicated server. And with this suggestion here, which I'm fond of, it's really lightweight because it doesn't do much. It doesn't run the simulation, so it's really cheap, right? So you can probably run a lot of these side by side, right? And it wouldn't take much CPU. It probably would take a lot of, networking, but it's probably reasonable in some ways. So I think whatever we do, we probably should retain like the legacy way of how the thing works with, the peer-to-peer connection, because it's very flexible. You don't need like the central server that orchestrates this, right? You can just like open a network room over Hamachi Redman, right? And just have the two clients play with each other, right? So that's pretty straightforward. But yeah, on top of that, we can explore new implementations that, can bring more security, efficiency. And what I'm very fond is being able to connect to this thing so that you can have many spectators, which is great for live streamers, right? So you can have like multiple live streamers who connect to the server and watch all the players. So you don't need like this active observer that is part of, the game slots that matches together with the players, but you can just have anyone that has a compatible client connect to this replay or the simulation, right? And catch up and just watch it on your own client. So basically your client is replicating the simulation as the players are creating that simulation on the server, right? So I really like this implementation. I'm not so sure about the implementation from Mark because I haven't thought about it much. I also haven't thought about this much, but there are different ways to do these things. I think for now we will probably polish the legacy implementation, fix all the bugs that we can find because it's the right thing to do. And then once we have like a stable thing, then we can still explore other implementations, supplementary implementations. But I think for now, I think it's probably a good idea to not just like scrap the old implementation, but try to explore a new implementation. And if a new implementation makes the legacy one entirely obsolete, where we see, okay, no one is using the legacy one, the new implementation is superior in all measures, everyone is using it, then I think it's a good point to say, okay, yeah, just get rid of the old shit. I'm really not a fan of just deprecating something if there could still be use, and we haven't proven yet that the new implementation is superior. That's always a big risk, that you scrap something that is fully functioning. Now you could argue, if it's mismatching, is it really fully functioning? But it is functioning for the most part. If you fix all the issues and then it is fully functioning without any mismatches, then it definitely is fully functioning. And so you need a justification to scrap this, right? If the new implementation is superior, then yeah, of course it's a no-brainer. But there's also the risk that if you make this new implementation, that you open a new box of Pandora to introduce more issues, right, of other kinds, right? So that needs to be tested well, and that needs to be stabilized before you abandon the legacy stuff. Yeah, that's my thought on this. But yeah, certainly having new solutions to fix problems is certainly a good idea. Yeah.
Developers, coders that are trawling through the source code and making improvements now. But let's say we, the community, think it would be very valuable having you on board, and let's say we gathered enough money to pay you for 2 weeks, let's say, and work and help on the project. Is that something you'd be open to at all, or not?
Probably. Assuming that there's no severe time constraints, because I work on various things. But yeah, I think that would be really fun.
Okay.
I'm surprised that he mentioned paid. I think it would have been good if he asked that question without the payment. I'm not aware about any time in history where a developer doing something for 0 hour was paid. So I think that was not really a thing. So it would be a first. I think there were some like commissional work, like if some mod developer asked some artist to do some model and then maybe they got paid, or with some maps creation. But we're talking like really small bucks, right? So if you want to pay Mark Lorenzen, I don't know how much commission he would take, but if you look like at an American salary for programmer, you're looking at, I don't know, $50 an hour plus, maybe. I don't know. Could be a lot, right? So I mean, what is a yearly salary? 100,000 plus, maybe. Let's say I don't know how much he would make. Maybe he makes $120,000 a year. Yeah, and so then you can break it down. Okay, how much would that be an hour if you break it through all the weeks and all the weeks and work days, right? So it could be a lot of change. Yeah.
Okay, let me speak to the people who are working on it, because I think your input and your expertise could be very valuable. There's always people, private sponsors, throwing money around. At 0 hour, we have tournaments. This tournament this year is going to be over $20,000. So there's a lot of interest in 0 hour at the minute. So leave that with me, and I'll come back to you. Okay, here's a big one. So in 0 hour, we have this thing where if you move in a diagonal line, you can move faster across the grids. Like I think 46% faster or something like that across the map. And there's a lot of talk about, now the source code's out there, they want to fix this diagonal line thing and they want to standardize it. I guess you're nodding. This is something you're aware of. Was that something intended for 0 hour, or was it not thought of at the time?
No, but I have a suspicion about what's behind it.
Okay.
The AI update module and its various subclasses are clients to a pathfinding service. It's a singleton class that you do a pathfinding request to it, and then you get put into a queue, and when it finishes running on its thread, it then sends you your path back. many of the AIs, in order to deal with the complexity of the changing condition of the playfield, meaning that structures are being built and destroyed and units are pathing in your way that weren't there when the path was computed. They have a refresh update rate that where the AI component will make it a certain distance from the last point where its path was computed, and then it will re-request the path from its current position. And then if the new path is smarter than the old one, which typically it would be, then it follows the new path, which will like dodge the structure that's in its way, or dodge the fleet of tanks that are standing in the way, or that kind of a thing. So what I think is happening with your diagonal is that a smaller number of you're traversing a smaller number of grid squares while moving diagonally than you are at an orthogonal direction. And therefore, you are repathing less frequently. And repathing less frequently allows you to move faster. That's my theory.
He's wrong. I'm surprised that you put such a complicated theory out there. The theory is the actual issue is simply that the implementation to calculate the movement speed, the 2D and the 3D movement speed, has incorrect math. That's the whole issue. So like there's some calculation to calculate the movement distance as you move like a certain angle, and that calculation is incorrect. The way it's calculated is incorrect. So just correcting the math puts the length at the correct the length depending on the angle at the correct length, and then it works correctly. So basically, what happens, it doesn't, like if you imagine a circle, like maybe we can make a painting here. Paint. Like so here is like one square, yeah, one square. And now imagine in the square we have a circle, right? And so if you, now let's take another color, blue, right? So if you move just up, then you move in this direction and this length. Let's just say this length is 1, right? And if you move in this other straight direction, you move another length 1, right? And now here, if you move this 45 degrees, you also expect to move in the same length, right? Length 1. But what happens instead is you move this length, right? Which is square root of 2, 1.41 some number, right? So you move 1.441 times faster here in the diagonal, because the calculation is simply wrong. It doesn't compute up to this point, but it computes up to this point, and that's it. That's the whole issue. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you just had a drag race and you put like 2 Humvees in the corner of the map and you sent one straight up to the adjacent corner and the other one to the opposite corner, the one going to the opposite corner would arrive first, right?
Yeah.
So that's the raw quick test. And so that would be a very quick proof environment to test my theory. That if the repath was scheduled not based on grid traversal increments, but on actual raw distance, then I'll bet they would synchronize. That's my theory, and it would be really quick to test it. And if I'm wrong, then it'd be really quick to abandon that and move to the next theory.
Yeah,
One
I don't
idea
know.
that's adjacent to that is that it uses the A-star pathfinding algorithm, which uses a diagonal heuristic, which means that it has this magic number that it uses to compare the cost of a diagonal movement relative to a non-diagonal movement. Because it's kind of like crossword connects adjacent squares that are touching either on the broad side or on the corner. And when it's on the corner, it has to be considered a little bit more expensive than the broad side because the distance traveled is a little greater. And so there's a magic number in the code for what that cost is, and maybe tweaking that would have an influence. But it seems like that would not affect the speed of the unit, but it would affect the efficiency of the path.
Okay.
So that'd be maybe the number two thing, is to see whether it's simply a function of the shape of the path that's returned.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know exactly, obviously, why it happens, but someone did say that apparently it is a common thing in games that people have to look at, moving faster in diagonal lines, they said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially the older the game, the more likely it is to have been an oversight, I think.
Okay. So it was definitely an oversight, then it wasn't thought of and then
I
left
I
or
I,
something.
I don't know.
Okay.
I only have theories.
Yeah, okay.
For one thing, I haven't seen the code in 24 years, and the other is that I don't have the code. I don't have the code in front of me. So
Yeah. Because it's a very controversial topic at the minute, because there's like the hardcore, like top 20, top 10 players who know the game inside out. We know every pixel, every damage rate, everything. Um, and
yeah,
they're quite protective and don't want the game to change really at all. And some people think that that might have been an intentional thing to leave that diagonal line thing in. Because it will change build orders. Like, you won't be able to get a bulldozer over to the other side of the map, will arrive there 5 seconds slower, which means your flame tank is out later. It changes the whole game quite a lot if you fix it.
all right.
So yeah, it's very controversial at the minute.
Yeah, yeah. There would be a lot of knock-on effects to fixing the problem, because then, yeah, other balance concerns would be
Yeah,
unbalanced. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
My thought on this is that it is a fundamental issue, and I think it's an issue that you don't want to carry forward for eternity, because it will lock you into bad designs. There needs to be one point where you just say, okay, it needs to change, and over time, maybe the first days it's maybe weird, but I would also expect that most players won't notice. 99% of players won't notice. Some players may notice it just because they know it was changed. And maybe some players notice because they do traverse the map slower than or faster than they did before. Certainly. Right? But on average, like you can certainly fix it in a way that on average every unit travels at the same, in the same speed as before, right? Simply by, like, when we go back to our graphic here, like, you can say, okay, the diagonal originally was this long, right? So let me reinforce that here with the green color. Yeah, so the original diagonal travel was here this green length, right? And the blue one was for the other direction. So as you can see, the green one is much longer than the blue one, right? But you can average this and you can say, okay, we don't just like bring the green line back to the circle, but we put it somewhere in between, that now the unit length is actually this far, right? So it sits somewhere between the blue line and the former green line, right? So, the movement is now somewhere around this circle. Oh shit. Let me draw a circle maybe from here. Like, yeah, somewhere around here, right? So that would be the new movement length in all directions. So as you can see, you now have more range here and less range in the diagonal, but you have more range here on the on the straight sides, right? Which when I can draw this here, somehow I cannot pick the right tool. Yeah, here, like this, right? So as you can see now we have a peace symbol, yeah, but also now we have like the nice equal direction, all equal speed in all directions, yeah, and they sit somewhere between the former low end and max end, right? So I think that's a proper solution here for us. Yeah. Yeah. So I personally, I don't see a big deal with fixing this, but certainly it's something that can be made configurable, right? There we say, okay, in the ini file you can select the old legacy behavior, or you can select the fixed behavior, right? So at least it's configurable and you can opt in, opt out. But I do think that long term we want this, because this movement issue carries issues with it. So for example, one of the issues that this causes is when you send a bomber, a bomber plane, like the carpet bomber, the US Air Force bomber, and it comes from the diagonal side of the map, flies in, right? The carpet bomber. Then it flies much faster into the scene than if it comes from some straight line. And so the bombs that it drops will also be scattered much further apart. And when it comes in a straight line, then the bombs are closer, falling closer together. Now it's questionable whether one thing is better than the other, but it's an issue, and you cannot control this properly, right? Because the plane comes at random, sort of random directions, and the same happens with the accuracy of the drop. So when you drop, so let's say your drop target is this red target here, yeah. That's your drop target, and here your drop target was here, so at the center, yeah, of this line. But then this one has a different velocity, so the actual drop target might be not here where you clicked, but like the velocity, it drags the bomb a lot further forward, right? So it has more velocity, whereas here, if it has less velocity, then the drop may actually drop closer to your actual drop location, right? Or you can tweak it, like if your travel speeds are always the same, no matter where they come from, you can set it up in a way where the drop location matches the actual target location, right? So the way it's currently implemented with this bug makes these superpowers, the planes that you can send in with the bombs, makes it really hard to like predict where they drop it, right? Because of the different velocities. And so like this bug fix is necessary to properly fix the bombers. Yeah, that's one thing. Is there another thing? I'm not so sure about other things. I don't. Maybe there's some other bugs from this, but I'm not aware about this. But maybe there is something. But this is a big thing that I noticed with the bombers. But yeah, apart from this, like, yeah, if I mean, it is kind of weird that diagonal driving is much faster than straight driving. So it's counterintuitive. It's not realistic. And you always need to think about, okay, if we were to make this game anew, like from scratch, would you design the game with this kind of movement in a 3D game? The answer is most likely not, right? You wouldn't design the game like this. You would say, no, if a unit drives in either direction, it always drives the same speed. It doesn't drive faster if it has this angle. It drives the same way in all directions, right? That would be the expectation. And so from this angle, like, I think you put most players and future players a disservice if you just don't tackle this problem. Now, don't tackle this problem a bad way. Like if you would just fix it, by reducing the speed to this blue line here, right? Then obviously that could be pretty bad, because then everything would be moving slower. It would be correct, but everything would be moving slower. So I think this green circle approach, is the right way to go here. And as I said, I think 99% of players won't notice. And those that notice, they would probably like it. And those that don't like it, well, suck it up, right? That's a circle of life. You won't like everything. Yeah. But I think this fix is important. I think so. Yeah. Okay, but whether or not it comes with like your first patch or second patch or so, I can't say, right? It's something that that people need to agree on. But certainly I will be advocating for this, because there are strong arguments to fix this properly. And I think an easy way here is to just test it, implement it, play test it, see how it feels. And I actually would be surprised if people say that the game sucks so much because of this fix. I would actually say that most people say I didn't notice any difference. Other people would say it feels amazing. And some others would maybe say, okay, I liked it before because XYZ, but yeah, that's just the way. Maybe it's just because they are so attached to how it was originally, and they like to hold on the idea of the original game and don't ever change anything, right? That certainly exists as well. Yeah. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
Okay.
Yeah, likewise, when you send a bunch of GLA bikes across the playfield to go and scrub out the shroud, you know, this is something that Chris would do. He would build like 10 bikes and then go, just click in the mini map and just like spread out and
Yeah.
unshroud the entire map, and they would all just go until they either reached the far corner or they died. And then if the one going diagonally is going faster, then that would, if it really is going faster, doesn't that also mean that it's evading pursuit faster? Because if it evades pursuit faster, then it's more survivable, and then all of these knock-on effects.
True. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Were there any units or ideas or even an extra faction or anything like that was discussed, but maybe there was no time to implement it, like something that never came about that we have no idea about?
Yeah, there were a lot of those. The stack of design specs probably got cut by at least 50%.
Whoa, okay.
And I'd have to, like, some of them never got started, in fact. I would probably need days to think about it to recall some of those for you, but I mean, let me try my best. I have this vague recollection that there was a structure that could house hackers. It was like a hacking center or something like that.
Yeah, that's in the game. Internet Center.
The Internet Center, right?
Yeah, that's in the game. Yeah.
It's a cyber cafe, right? Um no, there was something built on that idea that never got implemented. And
Okay.
I don't know, I have only the vaguest recollection. It's a long time ago, but I remember that there was a lot of chatter about it because the idea felt so cool, but I think it was determined that it was going to take more effort than we had time for. Because the things that we ended up implementing were the things that fit I don't know, it was something like 4 or 5 months of development time to do all of 0 Hour. And that's really, really fast.
Mm-hmm.
The ships. The Navy that made it into the product is embarrassingly bad. But there was quite a lot of high concept for ways of making that really, really good, and that never happened. So a ship is a Humvee with a big backpack that drives through the ocean right now. It's
What is that? Is that what it's based on?
well, I mean, essentially it is. It's using the same components.
Wow.
It has a different legal pathfinding surface, which causes the pathfinding algorithm to give you ocean paths instead of land paths. And that, other than that, it's the same locomotor, and that's why the ship will go, travel in a straight line and then go yeah,
Yeah.
like that
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
it does an elbow turn, and the ships don't do that.
Yeah.
Um, and so the idea would be to have the big ships, like there's all the anecdotes about like how long it takes to turn the Titanic, that you really do need a completely different class of locomotor for Navy, and that never got implemented. So that's one of the things. Um,
Okay.
there was already a spec for that just described how the maps would have to have enough space for ships to maneuver in, and the different shoreline units that would have relationships to producing and docking and repairing naval things, and the ability to drive your fleets of ground units onto the decks of the ships and to land your aircraft on the aircraft carrier. Um, and so those features are just very crudely and rawly simulated in the current implementation. Like I think there's a level that has an aircraft carrier that's static, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken, and then there's some that have the battleships and they move like wheeled vehicles, and
Yeah.
it's embarrassing. I would love to see that done in a mature way.
Yeah.
Um,
So I've seen like the aircraft carrier, I've seen the battleship, which even though the movement might be a little bit weird, I still think both of those things are still really cool. There's obviously the GLA PT boat, I think it's called in the game.
yeah,
I think it's like hidden in the world builder. You have to place it maybe. But
yeah.
was there anything else? Was there like any submarines or any China Navy or anything that we didn't get to see or didn't get built?
I wish I could recall those for you, but
I know it's so
you
long
know,
ago,
yeah,
really
a
tested
lot
and
of a
limited.
lot of those things just got scrubbed in the first scoping pass. Where Chris and I and Graham and um, John, looked at everything and kind of came to an agreement of like what the cost of all of these things is going to be. And they said, well, dang, we got to cut half of our stack. And so the only time I saw it was in being able to tell Greg that it was too expensive.
Yeah.
Uh, and I remember during that phase, the Spectre gunship was going to get cut, but I like said, like, no, don't cut it. I love it. I love it so much. I promise I'll work overtime and do it. And so that's why the Spectre gunship didn't get cut.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. So there's
That probably meant some very hard overtime and crunching and sleeping in the office. Just for us to be able to use the Spectre gunship. Yeah, good job.
things that are in the game's code but not like selectable in a normal multiplayer game. Like there's two bosses, who is it? Ironside and what's the other guy called? Deathstrike, the GLA boss. They're like, I don't think they got finished or something, and you can play some customized maps and you can get access to them, but they're not actually in the game or part of the campaign. Were they stripped due to time? Do you know? Or
That would have been a design team concern.
okay,
And I will bet that who would else be really good to interview would be John Combs, because I
okay,
bet that's something that he invented just on his own initiative and then just left it in the data files. Um, because he would be the one who's like initiating all of these really esoteric experiments, of trying to mod the existing tech to do things no one ever expected. And so he's probably inventing bosses and generals and things, and maybe even making scripted levels that employed them as a test, but then ultimately we found that it was out of scope or we ran out of time.
Okay.
Um, but John might have a keen memory about like what those things were and why, what they were for.
Okay.
But that's something that John could have done, and like Chris and I wouldn't even know about it. That's the kind of work that John did.
Ah, okay.
Meaning
Um,
he didn't have to do code. He was just messing around with the ini files and making stuff up. Um,
so that's the guy that came up with the generals for Zero Hour, yeah, like the laser general and the demolition general. Is that
yeah,
the same guy? Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, well, he and the other designers like Jason and Greg, they all kind of shared the high concept, but John was able to implement some of the ideas without any engineer intervention, just by using existing tech, which is kind of a testament to the versatility of the component model that we had, is that the
Mhm.
components we had could be combined with each other and tuned in novel ways. It's still true.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. There's some other things that are still in the data files, like the laser ranger. I think there's a laser Comanche, a laser Burton that didn't make it into the game. Do you know anything about
Right.
those, or would it be a John
Um,
question?
you should have asked Chris when you had him,
I
because
did.
you did? Did he
Yeah, I
not
did.
remember?
Yeah, he didn't know. He just said generally sometimes things get put in the data files and they don't make it for various reasons, but he didn't know the exact reason.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the exact reason either. And I have a vague recollection of seeing those just in passing.
Okay.
But there's a lot of clutter in the I&I space of things that just aren't they're not ever included in a level, and they aren't included in the basic the basic tech tree. Because all of that is data driven. So, you could add the laser Burton to your tech tree if you wanted to, just messing around with the ini files. Um, and again, I think that John Combs would probably be able to tell the story about that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. Um
Maybe Graham knows too. You know, just a third pair of eyes to maybe have seen it and remember what it was about.
yeah, yeah, I'll definitely ask. Yeah, I really hope I get hold of John because yeah, we'd be fascinated to hear like were there any other like generals thought of that didn't came to be? And like we have the nuclear general or we have the tank general.
Right.
If there was any others that could have been that never came about, we'd be so interested in hearing about those. So I think John's the guy for that, isn't he?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, he would be. Yeah, you could probably get Greg Black or Jason Bender would probably also remember, because that would have been something that would have been an ongoing conversation in the design team. Um,
Okay.
it wasn't really a thick layer of insulation between engineering and design, but there were things that were left in the idea space, and there were uh, I guess we were sheltered from it to spare our mental energies toward things that we
Yeah,
knew
yeah,
we wanted to ship. Um, and so we'd see it, being checked into source control in the innies and go like, "Oh, laser Burton, what the heck is that?" Like, I don't know, and then get back to work,
yeah,
that kind of a thing.
yeah. It sounds like you were busy enough anyway. I'm
Yeah,
sure
super
they
busy.
could they could
I mean,
spare
like,
some stuff.
we were making the features like the ability to have generals, for example,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
once you could have a general, then you just put an ini file and you make a general, and then they have their own tech tree and their own power set and um, their own voiceover files and all of those kind of things.
hmm Um, yeah. I think that's all of my questions that I had. Is there anything that I've not covered already that you wanted to say, or anything else interesting?
Let me look at my one pager. Oh, I don't think it. One thing that happened is one of the senior engineers on all of those projects, John Alquist, he died recently, and so I don't know if everybody is who knew John was aware of that. but maybe that can be discovered, by somebody watching this. But he
Okay.
was he was my mentor. Um, when I first started, I was put in a room with him so that I could learn, like I could become a good programmer by being near him, and it worked. And everyone really liked John, and he was like the dad of the engineering team. He knew everything about everything, and we just recently lost him. So,
Hmm. Yeah, sorry to hear that.
so
Um,
there's some people who deserve a lot more credit than Chris or Graham or I in the invention of the Sage engine. And the ones who I know about would be people like Mike Booth and Steven Johnson and Colin Day, who nobody's calling them to interview them because they uh, left the team before we shipped.
okay.
But I mean, if you want to just count up the occurrence of author names in the source code, those are the guys who really made the engine.
Okay.
Um, so Mike Booth, Steven Johnson, Colin Day. I'm probably Matt Campbell. There's a lot of guys that were
Yeah.
responsible for a lot of really ingenious and original and hard work that made the work of people like Chris and Graham and me possible.
Okay.
Because we were the ones who were coding to the game itself, and these are the guys who were building the engine. You know,
Okay. So they might be the ones that are familiar with this footage that got posted on YouTube. They might have even been some of the people that recorded some of this
I don't know,
footage. That
maybe
yeah, maybe.
could be.
Yeah.
If you could find, if you could find Mike Booth, if you could find Colin Day, I've lost touch with those guys completely, but they're out there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I'm more than open to speaking to anyone who worked on the Sage engine or Zero Hour or anything. So if they're watching, yeah, they can reach out to me. Otherwise, yeah, I'll see if Chris can put me in touch with any of them.
Yeah.
It'd be really, really interesting. Um, okay then. Is there, if anyone wants to follow you on social media or anything, is there any channel you want people to follow you on? Or I mean, you don't have to. I'm
Oh,
just giving you the opportunity.
the Discord.
Don't give me a Discord on this video. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll
Well,
keep
if
it.
anyone wants to
Yeah.
connect with me, they can easily find me just by my name, um,
Yeah. Okay.
on
Uh.
Discord or anywhere else.
Yeah.
I'm on LinkedIn too.
Okay. And are you you're working at the moment on games? Yeah. Or are you looking for a new company or new project or anything?
I'm looking for a new permanent position right now, but right now I'm doing some freelance work in the interim.
Okay.
Um, so both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully there's some games companies that have got some big projects and something
Yeah.
exciting or Generals 2. That will be the dream.
That sounds like fun.
Okay. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for spending so much time. I know we've run over nearly 2 hours and 15 minutes. So you can tell I'm passionate about the game and I play it pretty much every day and thousands of people watch it. So we really appreciate everything you did on the game and speaking to us now and answering all the questions.
Yeah, I agree. It was great to see Mark answering questions. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, that was also a very long session for me. I will cut it here. Yeah, 3 hours 38. I really need to take a break now. Yeah, there's one more interview here. John Combs interview with Zero Hour designer John Combs. That's the one that Mark Lorenzen mentioned a couple of times here in this session. So that we can look at in the future. That's 1 hour 30 here, 5 days ago. So we can look at that in some time. Yeah. All right, then. Yeah, I will end it here. I hope you enjoyed. I wish you a great day. Until next time. Goodbye.